Hello. Welcome to Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this is the 1993 Menendez brothers trial, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez, on trial for the homicides of their parents, Jose and Kitty, who treated them very, very badly. A lot of maltreatment took place in their home, and so we are rewatching the trial, knowing now what we know, what we didn't know back then. This kind of thing wasn't talked about so much as it is now. So, and it's still not even talked about. I still have to, censor myself to say certain words. I can't say the A word here or CA. You have to say maltreatment or, CA. You can't say it. So there's still even a stigma today, which sucks. So that's why I'm doing this. And I want to be a voice for victims and to be an advocate for victims and to just know that, uh, I want people to be aware of the way that they treat others because how you treat others really can affect someone. I had a boss who was extremely abusive, like a boss. She would yell at us, tell us, gaslight us. She would tell us how to do something one way, and then she would turn around and, you do it that way. And she turned around and be like, I didn't tell you how to do that. You were supposed to do it, I want you to do it this way. And she just changed her mind. She was awful, awful. This person made my life miserable. So I just want other people, and I had an abusive ex-husband too. So I want to be able to at least kind of share my experiences or my perspective when I look at these things to help you guys and just to, educate people. So that's all I can ask is that, we learn and do better. So, also, I want to say a little housekeeping item. I am so sorry about part two. For some reason, my mic just decided to stop connecting with my streaming software, or the streaming software decided my mic was no longer viable out of nowhere. So I did several videos that had no sound. So that's always fun when that happens. Um, so yeah, so I apologize. I didn't redo that one just because I didn't have the time and had already been scheduled and it was, I was down to the wire. So I apologize. There was no commentary. It is still watchable. You can skip through the silent parts now. So I apologize for that. I don't think I talked all that much during it anyways because as you will see, we listened to the Oziel tape, which was in part one. I'm gonna put the Oziel script in a link to the script in the description below, so you can refer back to it and look at the things that were said and how, who was talking, what Oziel said, and versus the boys and everything. You can go back over that if you want at your own time or on your own leisure. So we are going to continue on then. This is the experts discussing the content of that tape and how a confession tape might, Dr. Ann Burgess is on the stand. We're going to continue with her. She is going to tell us what kinds of things someone would want in a therapist's tape with their client or patient while they're confessing to a crime and point things out that Oziel didn't do correctly and also analyze, some of the content of the tape. So we're going to continue on with that. This is part three and the final part. And then finally, we're going to get to the examination of Lyle starting Tuesday of next week. So please hit that like button. Please make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss upcoming streams of this trial. So let us begin. And here we go.
Does could have happened at any moment, okay?
Yes.
In your interpretation, support planning or non-planning?
It supports non-planning.
And
So they're obviously referring to the crime because the state is claiming that this was a planned homicide. However, the boys are claiming that they were fearful for their lives. So she's going to kind of break down their test or their tape and how the things that are said on the tape from the boys really does align with the defense's theory that the boys were terrified for their lives.
Turning to page 45, honestly, I never thought it would happen. In your opinion, does that support a notion of planning or a notion of non-planning?
Supports non-planning.
And why is that?
If it was a plan, you would have known when it would happen and it would have been planned out. It wouldn't be unknown as to either when something might happen or happened at any moment. That's inconsistent with planning.
Now, also turning your attention with the same notion in mind that you've testified that this was a disorganized crime scene and the nature of the number of shots, the mixed ammunition, the number and type of wounds, the location of wounds indicated a high degree of emotionality. You remember that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Calling your attention to the bottom of page 45, starting at the end of line 27 and going to line 28, do you see Lyle Menendez says, it was obvious that we felt tremendous amount of emotion.
Yes, I see that.
Is that consistent with a disorganized crime scene?
Yes, it is.
Is it consistent with a planned crime?
No, it is not consistent with a planned crime.
So, within the four corners of this document, are there things said, mainly by Lyle Menendez, but also in part by Erik Menendez, that seem to indicate there was a decision to kill on the one hand, and then other things said that contradict that?
Yes.
Is the document consistent?
Objection, calls for speculation on part of the witness.
Sustained.
And again, if you look at starting at page 46 and going over to 47, let me strike that. Do you notice, by the way, Dr. Burgess, that starting when Lyle Menendez at the end of this document starts talking at length about the killing of the parents and goes on for pages and pages, do you notice that Dr. Oziel doesn't interrupt?
Yes, I do.
And doesn't ask any follow-up questions, really, but for in two places?
That's correct.
And you're mindful of the testimony of Judalon Smith that Dr. Oziel said to her after this was made?
Counsel, this is just argumentative at this point, so let's ask a appropriate question.
He no longer is trying to change the subject?
Is he? Is that a question?
Yes, is he any longer, does it appear, attempting to change the subject?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you notice that on page 46 at lines 18 through 19, Lyle Menendez says he wants to take care of this problem. He's referring to Erik Menendez. He's referring to Erik talking about wanting to practice rather than go somewhere and do something.
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, move to strike speculation.
All right, just objection to the answer stricken. Which lines are you referring to? And the witness can look at those lines.
Okay, we're referring to page 46, line 18 through 19.
All right.
He wants to take care of this problem.
All right, do you see those lines?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay. And as a therapist, if a patient said this to you in this context, should there have been a significant follow-up here?
Yes, there should have been.
And what should the follow-up have focused on?
Follow-up should have focused on what problem, this problem that he refers to. It has no reference. You'd explore that.
Okay. And the same on page 47 on line 6, where Lyle Menendez says, and it had nothing to do with the main problem, which required a lot of courage.
Yes.
Is that another thing that would require a follow-up?
Yes, it is.
And with respect to cognitive dissonance, does the requirement of courage make sense in the context of a mercy killing?
No, it does not.
Does it make sense in the context?
So again, she's pointing out the things that Oziel was not doing correctly. So the boys were saying certain things that would absolutely require a licensed mental health professional to follow up on, and he failed to do so multiple times and inserted his own opinion often. And you could often see that the boys would be like, yeah, and agree with him with some of the things that he said, but a lot of times they pushed back. They pushed back and said, well, no, not really. So you can just tell that there was some dissonance between Oziel and the boys here.
Context of self-defense.
Yes, it does.
Do you have any information, Dr. Burgess, about why, after having made this lengthy speech or series of speeches about the killings of the parents, uninterrupted by Dr. Oziel, the tape suddenly goes off?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Is the question, does she have any information?
So to follow up on that, they discussed it in in one of the other parts where the tape just cuts off abruptly in basically mid-sentence where Lyle is talking. And so this is what she's asking about. How did that happen? Is that normal? Explain that kind of thing.
The tape suddenly goes off.
Objection, calls for speculation.
Is the question, does she have any information based upon what you heard on the tape?
Based on what you heard on the tape or any documents that you've seen?
Based upon what you've heard on the tape, do you have any information as to why the tape stopped?
No, I do not.
Your Honor, I think that concludes my examination in front of both juries.
All right, and is there any examination on behalf of the defendant Lyle Menendez at this point? All right, let me just discuss the matter briefly with counsel here at the sidebar, and then we'll proceed. There's going to be a cross-examination at this point before both juries, and then after that is completed, then there might be some redirect examination and then some further examination before the Erik Menendez jury only. But before we start, the lawyers want a short break, so we'll make this our morning recess, and we'll resume at 10 minutes after the hour, 10 minutes after 10. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it, and we'll resume at 10 minutes after 10. Okay, begin your cross-examination.
Dr. Burgess, I believe part of the thrust of your testimony on direct examination was your criticism of Dr. Oziel's therapy techniques. Would that be correct?
That would be correct.
Now, I believe you also indicated that in evaluating this tape or the circumstances surrounding it, that you considered the testimony of Judalon Smith.
Yes.
And were you here for all of her testimony or just the last day where cross-examination occurred?
Actually, just Tuesday. That would be the cross-examination.
And did you read her testimony from last Friday and Monday?
No, I did not.
All right, so you're just basing it on what you saw while you were here on Tuesday, correct?
Yes, correct.
And could you tell me which Judalon Smith you were relying upon? Were you relying on her testimony in front of Judge Albrecht in 1990?
Objection before the question on argument.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
All right.
Yeah, that was a weird question. Which Judalon Smith were you talking about?
Now, you saw Ms. Smith testify here. Did you find her an interesting subject as a psychologist?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Did you find Ms. Smith to be a rather interesting subject, considering that you're trained in psychology?
Yes.
Okay. And you are aware of the fact that she gave a statement under penalty of perjury, a written affidavit in June of 1990, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you're aware of the fact that she gave testimony to a judge in Santa Monica in July of 1990 under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware of the fact that she talked to a newswoman named Diane Sawyer on national television, not under penalty of perjury, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware of the fact that she spoke with the police for approximately 7 hours on tape on March the 6th of 1990?
Yes.
And you're then aware that she testified in front of you in this court on November the 16th of 1993?
Correct.
Which of her statements were you relying on?
I was relying on the statement regarding the tape, that in her memory of the current memory that she testified to here, as she explained that the memory that she had back at the time in 1990, that she felt that she was being brainwashed, I guess was the word that she used, and explained that in terms of, in response to your questions.
Now, you mentioned the word brainwash, which is something that Ms. Smith used on Tuesday, correct?
I believe it was, yes.
Okay. And yesterday, when you were testifying, at one point you had counted up 13 times in one segment of conversation that Dr. Oziel used the words control.
Yes.
Were you trying to imply to the jury that Dr. Oziel was trying to brainwash the defendants into thinking that their father controlled them?
I think the point there was the word, he uses the word over and over and over. I don't think that we made any connection with that, except that the word control was used so frequently and
why?
repetitively.
All right. Now, when an expert testifies in court that a crime scene is disorganized, and the expert says the crime scene is disorganized over and over again, do you find fault with that?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
When Dr. Oziel uses the word control, why do you find fault with that?
I find fault with that because that's not a word that's used by either of the brothers. It never comes back into the tape. And this is a word that's used by the therapist. And one of the important points in therapy is that you are trying to draw from the patient in his or her own words and not interject your own thoughts, your own words.
At points in Lyle Menendez's speech to Dr. Oziel, he uses the word plan, P-L-A-N. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Objection,
Excuse me.
Your Honor, calls for conclusion and mistakes the evidence.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Just sustain the answer straight.
Okay, when Lyle Menendez says at page 44, line 25, do you have that reference now, Dr. Burgess?
Yes, I do.
When Lyle Menendez uses the word planning, can you show me where in the transcript Dr. Oziel himself used the word plan or planning?
I'm going to object before the question on calls for conclusion.
Overruled.
I would have to go. I don't recall where that is used,
Okay.
as a noun or as a verb.
In any form at all?
Any form.
Did you go through the transcript to see if Dr. Oziel has suggested to either of the defendants that this crime was planned?
I don't see that, correct.
And that doesn't exist in the transcript as far as you can tell, correct?
Not in this transcript, right.
Now, in considering the testimony of Judalon Smith as to the making of this tape, did you consider statements of hers, either in court here or out of court in another setting, which indicated that the tape was made for protection for Dr. Oziel and for Judalon Smith?
In terms of Judalon Smith's testimony?
Yes. Do you remember that there was either impeachment of Judalon Smith, and I can't remember where it occurred, but that there was, I believe, a prior statement of hers that was read to her that this tape was made for impeachment? Excuse me, for...
Object to that. Calls for conclusion on the part of the witness.
All right, why don't you rephrase the question?
Do you remember testimony elicited during Judalon Smith's cross-examination wherein it was revealed that she had been told that this tape was made to protect her and Dr. Oziel?
Object again, Your Honor. Calls for conclusion and mistakes the testimony. It's actually said on that.
All right, then objection is overruled. Do you understand the question?
Yes, but I don't have a recall of that.
You don't recall that?
On direct, I wasn't here for that.
All right. And you don't recall during cross-examination that she was impeached with a prior statement indicating that the tape was made for protection. Is that correct? You don't recall that?
I just don't recall that.
Okay. Did you consider in evaluating this tape other motivations aside from therapy for which the tape was made?
Your Honor,
Did you
I'm going to object because of the nature of the testimony in front of both juries. Is she asking for the opinions of witnesses already given, or opinions she's going to give?
This is cross-examination in relationship to what she has testified about. She's expressed certain opinions about the preparation of the tape, so she's been questioned about that. Overruled.
Should I restate the question since
Yes.
I can't remember precisely? Dr. Burgess, you criticized this tape as containing poor psychotherapy. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
Did you consider that the tape was made in order for Dr. Oziel to get the defendant's voices on tape so that he would have protection? Did you consider that as a possibility?
Yes, I did.
And if that was his motivation, he did in fact succeed in getting their voices on tape. Wouldn't you agree?
He did get their voices on tape. That's correct.
And are you aware of Dr. Oziel's prior testimony where he indicated that there was that he had offered to help the defendants prepare themselves in case they got caught? Are you aware of that prior testimony?
Overruled.
Well, I believe in the tape there is language that he uses in terms of like legally protecting. He does put that in this transcript.
Well, okay, Dr. Burgess, you say that you've had this transcript since before the last time you testified, right?
That's correct.
And the last time you testified and also now, you have reviewed Dr. Oziel's testimony, correct?
Well, I had at one point reviewed it. That's correct.
Well, you're being very critical of Dr. Oziel, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I am.
All right. And did you consider his other testimony before you rendered the criticism you gave to these juries yesterday?
I considered all of the materials I had, yes.
And were you aware of the fact that in the November 2nd session, there was discussion reported by Dr. Oziel in his testimony about preparing the defendants for in case they got caught?
I'm going to object to this, Your Honor. It's beyond the scope of the record, beyond the limits that were placed on the record.
Overruled.
Can you answer the question?
Yes.
All right. Did you consider that?
Yes.
Did you reject that idea?
In all of the materials that I had available, I rejected in terms of the yes.
Okay. Now, in that you have had this information for several months. Would that be correct? The information contained in the December 11 tape? You've had it
Yes.
for several months. Did you ever ask either Erik or Lyle Menendez about how the tape was made?
Yes.
And did you ask them whether they were cooperative in making this tape?
I'm objecting to the form of the question using the plural.
Sustained.
Did you ask Erik Menendez if he cooperated in making this tape?
I didn't use that language.
What language did you use?
I asked how it came about that the tape was made.
Okay. Did he indicate to you that he was forced to make the tape?
He felt pressured into it. He did not use the word force, but he certainly felt pressured into making the tape.
What did he tell you in regards as to why he made the tape?
He told me that Dr. Oziel had called him after about the end of November of 1989 and said that he was feeling uncomfortable, that he had not heard from either of the brothers, and that he wanted to see them. So that was one request. And in the course of that is where the request came to make this tape. He would feel more comfortable if he had this tape. He said it in that sense, Dr. Oziel did, and he said it in the sense also that perhaps this would be of help to the brothers if they had this. He alluded to that as a possible motive.
Now, when Erik Menendez repeated to you that Dr. Oziel had indicated this might be of help, does that corroborate Dr. Oziel's testimony from November the 2nd?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
Is it cognitively compatible?
I'm going to object to that as well, Your Honor. You can't use that in this setting.
All right. I don't know if you can use it in any setting, but this is the first time there's been an objection to it being used, so objection is sustained.
Okay. Dr. Burgess, when Erik Menendez repeated to you that Dr. Oziel had said it might be of help, did that make you recollect that Dr. Oziel had indicated at the November 2nd session that he had offered to help the defendants?
Objection, Your Honor. That's what you're saying.
Sustained.
Now, Dr. Burgess, I believe then you indicated that Erik Menendez knew beforehand that this tape might be of help. He indicated...
Objection misstates the testimony.
Rephrase the question.
Let me move on. Dr. Burgess, did you ask Lyle Menendez about why this tape was made?
No, I did not.
Right. So when you're talking, and did you ever ask Lyle Menendez what he meant by certain words that are contained within the transcript and the tape?
No, I did not.
Okay. So when you're telling the juries what you think the words meant, that's based upon your own expertise, correct?
I believe I was saying what was missed, the words that I felt were missed by Dr. Oziel.
Well, but at one point I think you said that when he said mother, he meant brother.
As metaphor, that's correct, yes.
Okay, but you never went and asked him what you really meant.
No.
Okay. And like when Lyle Menendez is talking about his mother can't go to dinner parties because dad comes home late, you don't mean to imply that at all points when Lyle Menendez said mother, he meant brother.
No, I do not.
And so it wasn't his brother who was missing out on the dinner parties, right?
Right, and when one uses a metaphor, it only is a clue to the therapist that they have to follow up on. You have to get that information from the patient. You don't make an interpretation without having corroborated it in the session.
Okay. Well, why didn't you just go ask Lyle Menendez, were you really talking about your brother here?
Well, Dr. Conti was really the one that was talking with Lyle Menendez, and I talked with his brother. That was
But do you
fine.
feel... I'm sorry.
That's who I talked to.
So you feel comfortable with telling us what Lyle Menendez must have meant by the word mother, even though you never asked him about it. Would that be fair to say?
That's argumentative. It misstates the witness testimony.
Rephrase the question.
Okay. So you see nothing, you don't experience any difficulty in saying what you think Lyle Menendez meant, even though you didn't ask him what he meant. Is that...
Objection argumentative.
Why don't you rephrase that? Do you? Rather than
Okay. Do you have any difficulty as an expert in expressing as an opinion as to what you think Lyle Menendez meant, even though you didn't ask him?
Objection on the statement.
Overall.
I don't have any difficulty stating that this was a possible metaphor that was missed by the therapist. That I do not have any difficulty. As I just said, you would have to go and then check the information out from the patient himself.
Now, you talked about the fact that Dr. Oziel used the word control quite a bit, correct?
Yes.
And would it be fair to say that he was using control in describing how the father ran his family?
Yes.
Do you have any disagreement with the fact that Mr. Menendez ran his family with a lot of control?
Well, I'm objecting this is beyond the scope of what this witness was permitted to rely on in testimony.
Sustained at this point.
Okay. Dr. Burgess, would you agree that part of the purpose of this tape is to explain the family dynamics?
That's one possibility, yes.
And as a matter of fact, in your testimony, previously you've tried to explain the family dynamics, haven't you?
Yes.
Overall, the answer will stand.
Now, I believe you've indicated that one of your expertises, I think that's the right word, expertises, is that you train people to do therapy, right?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever trained anyone as to what they're supposed to do when someone comes in and confesses to a double homicide and then says, I'm going to kill you too?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor. This states the testimony.
Overall.
They're in educating, training persons for therapy, you do go into forensic issues, ethical issues. And given in a wider context than that particular example, you would have guidelines for what therapists are to do, or you would suggest the guidelines given certain kinds of situations. And it isn't as specific as that example, but there certainly are guidelines given for any behaviors that are injurious to the self or to others.
Have you personally ever had someone come in and confess to murder and then threaten to kill you? Has that personally ever happened to you?
I can object to that. It's beyond the scope of the relevant.
Overall.
And not where I was treating the person before and then was seeing the person after an event. No, I have not.
Okay. Now, you have dealt, I take it in your practice, with people who are killers, correct?
Yes, we've done research projects on killers.
But those people were all in custody, right?
That is correct.
All right. And so your experience has never been that you were in your office without a guard or something with someone who was out of custody who told you they committed murder and then threatened you. That's not happened to you, correct?
That's correct.
Are you familiar with the testimony of a doctor named Jeffrey Lulo in this case who testified about what he told Dr. Oziel to do to protect himself?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is beyond the scope. Calls for conclusion.
It is beyond the scope. Objection sustained. It is beyond the scope.
All right. Now, you've indicated here that you don't think the therapy that Dr. Oziel was performing was very good, correct?
This particular tape, that's correct.
Okay. And if, in fact, Dr. Oziel was making the tape in order to put it in a safety deposit box at the direction of another psychologist, would you find fault with his methodology in accomplishing that purpose?
Objection, Your Honor. This states the evidence.
Overall.
If that was the case, it should be on the tape. I think what's very important is we get no instructions, even in the beginning of this tape, of why it is. And that's a basic violation of when you're recording patients.
Well, do you have any reason to believe that this was not made voluntarily by the defendants?
The defendants felt they had no choice in the making of this tape. So from that standpoint, they were very much pressured into it. That point needs to be made. They did make it. They did go to the office.
Now, then, so it's your opinion that they were pressured into making the tape? Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
And do you think, is it your opinion that Lyle Menendez was pressured into using the term planning out of this, like on page 44 that we just discussed? Do you think he was pressured into saying that?
I think this calls for speculation.
Overall.
That's taken out of context. I don't think that he was forced to say that. I think he's giving information that needs to be, I had a certain opinion on.
Dr. Burgess, you just said that I took that out of context. Is that correct?
Those words. Yes, there's a larger sentence there.
Well, you testified for quite a while yesterday about different terms contained within these 47 pages. Those weren't taken out of context. Is that fair to say?
Sustained.
Were the terms that you discussed yesterday with the juries taken out of context?
Overall.
The words yesterday were used as points of clues that were missed. Either that or they were metaphors or examples were given where subject was changed. Questions were asked and answered within the same context. I thought that's what some of the examples were we were giving yesterday.
I believe one of the things that you criticized yesterday was the number of interruptions contained in the transcript. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
And are you aware of the fact that many times on the tape, what looks like an interruption in the transcript is actually someone not finishing a sentence?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that as calling for conclusion.
Overall. Do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. There are some examples, but for the most part, I believe that the examples that we were giving yesterday is where one of the brothers was interrupted. I don't know whether we went through every single example.
You are aware of the fact on the tape that not every sentence is completed, correct? Before the next person starts speaking?
I'm aware that there are little dots given for where there is not either can't be understood, but sentences, there are many sentences that end with a period, and then a question is asked or somebody else states something.
I believe you indicated that you teach therapy and that because you teach therapy, you find fault with what Dr. Oziel did, correct? This is preparatory to the next question. Isn't it correct that there are different theories of how much a therapist should talk during therapy?
I'm not aware of any therapy that says that a therapist is supposed to talk a lot or is supposed to interject their own ideas. That I'm not familiar with that therapy.
Well, my question really was, are there different theories about how much a therapist should talk during therapy? Isn't that correct?
To some degree, the length and the interjection and the interpretation, that is correct, to some degree.
For instance, the Freudians believe that the patient should talk and talk and that the therapist should not interject himself very much. Isn't that true?
Overall.
Isn't that correct, that the Freudians believe in less talking and that there are other theories that believe in more talking on the part of the therapist, correct?
Overruled.
They believe in few words, but when the words are made, that they impact. They do believe that you get all of your information from the patient, and that the therapist uses the information from the patient to move through the session.
I believe you indicated one of the things that you found fault with was at page 8. And what that was is that at page 8 on line 17, Dr. Oziel uses the word affair. And then right after that, Lyle Menendez picks up on the word affair, correct?
Yes.
All right. Would you turn, please, to page 4, line 18? Do you see there where Erik Menendez is talking and he uses the word affair?
Yes.
Does that change your opinion that it was Dr. Oziel who first brought up the word affair in this transcript?
Overruled.
I'm not sure that that was the point that was being made. I think the point that was being made has to do with how Lyle Menendez does more or less join on or repeat the word. I think that was the point we were making on page 8. His agreement with the therapist.
Now, I believe you indicated that there were many times when there was not follow-up and that there was some ambiguity in what was being said by either Erik Menendez or Lyle Menendez. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You are aware of the fact that there were sessions on October the 31st and November the 2nd which discussed some of these same issues, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you've indicated that some of the references go back and forth within the transcript. Did you consider the possibility that there were references to prior conversations made within this transcript by the defendants?
Within the transcript, yes.
And if it appeared that everyone knew what everyone else was talking about, would it be necessary for the therapist to go back and specify it?
Well, I'm going to object to 8 calls for speculation.
Overruled. But assuming that's the situation.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
If people have had prior conversations and then they have another conversation,
Yes.
and everyone knows what everyone else is talking about, the therapist wouldn't necessarily have to go back and spell everything out in the present session, correct?
That's one way of looking at it.
Now, within this transcript, Dr. Oziel gives many of his theories about the family dynamics, correct?
Yes, he does.
And sometimes the defendants reject those theories, and sometimes they adopt those theories, correct?
That's correct.
And in rejecting those theories, would that indicate to you that they were not being led by the nose by Dr. Oziel?
On those things they reject, that's correct, yes.
For instance, at one point he talks about the disinheritance, and I believe Lyle Menendez says, no, that really didn't have much to do with it.
That's right.
Okay, so Dr. Oziel was not successful at that point in trying to lead the defendants into saying something they didn't want to say.
Right. Dr. Oziel was not successful in only one of his suggestions. Or he was successful.
Pardon me?
I believe he was successful in one of his suggestions.
And which suggestion do you think he was successful in?
The one that he begins early on about the mother and how miserable she is. And he uses the word pitiful on page 5.
Okay. Now, would it be fair to say that Mrs. Menendez, during the last 3 years of her life, was a happy, well-adjusted person?
Well, I'm going to object to that beyond the scope of the presentation I was doing.
Overruled. It does relate to her testimony.
Would you say that
Questions.
Mrs. Menendez was a happy and well-adjusted person in the last 3 years of her life?
That is not the way she is characterized.
All right. And so when Dr. Oziel characterizes her that way, that's not false, is it?
I think the words he used, I don't think that that's the way he is characterizing her on page 5. That's what I was referring to.
Okay.
A shell of a person. I mean, he uses language that is quite interpretive of just a observed state of she's not happy or she's sad.
Now, I want to go back to page 2 and quickly go through the transcript and ask you some questions about it. So let's go to page 2. Starting at line 18, there's an indication here that Erik Menendez, now you have no reason to believe this isn't Erik Menendez's voice on the tape, correct?
That's correct.
And you have no reason to believe it's not Lyle Menendez's voice.
That's correct.
And you have no reason to believe this tape wasn't made on December the 11th of 1989, correct?
Right. Yes,
All
correct.
right. Now, referring to line 18, Erik Menendez indicates that he found the suicide note in his mother's drawer under a book. Do you see that
Yes.
particular portion? Did you find that inconsistent with the testimony that Erik Menendez gave that the suicide note was left lying around the house?
Well, I'm going to object to that. It's improper cross-examination beyond the scope of politics.
It is beyond the scope of the direct examination.
Did you find the fact that the suicide note was found in a drawer under a book to be cognitively dissonant with the idea that the mother left suicide notes lying around?
All right, I'm going to same objection.
Overruled.
I'd like to hear the sidebar to be open on direct.
No.
Do you understand my question?
What I find important in that section, line 18 down through 21, is what Dr. Oziel does. What you find Erik Menendez doing is talking about crying, and you then see Dr. Oziel not going for the feeling, but going for the behavior. So he really focuses in on that, and that's how you get to the book.
But Dr. Burgess, there were 3 people talking on this tape, right? There were 3 people.
There were 3 people in the room. Yes, and at various times 3 people do talk, yes.
All right, and I want you to concentrate now on the statements of Erik Menendez contained on page 2, wherein he talks about finding the suicide note in the drawer under a book. And I'm asking you if you find that cognitively dissonant with the idea that Mrs. Menendez left it lying around the house.
All right, same objection.
Overruled answer that question.
It doesn't really, is it cognitively dissonant? It isn't quite clear where this book is, drawer, lying around. I don't necessarily find that without more information on this particular passage.
I mean, you don't think in a drawer under a book is specific enough, is that correct?
And lying around, with lying around.
Yeah, you find that to be compatible?
It doesn't necessarily be compatible. I don't find it either way. I just would certainly want to go more information if that was a particular interest in the therapy session.
Now, referring now to page 11, line 26 and 7. Lyle Menendez refers here to his girlfriend reading the letters that he found afterwards.
Sustain.
And, okay, it says, I mean from my girlfriend reading the letters that I found afterwards.
Okay, counsel, let's not argue.
Hey, everyone has a transcript. At line 26, starting with the word do you see that sentence there, which ends with afterwards?
Yes.
All right. Now, did you make any attempt to talk to Lyle Menendez about the letters that were found?
No, same objection. Counsel wants us to read it as singular, not plural.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a corrected copy.
I would be correct.
I think it's
Okay,
correct.
let's not have all this bickering here. The objection is that it was misread. You have seen the...
Not the corrected.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going to object. This is not the version that the jurors have. You have to read this supposed correction.
Okay, you're the one that provided these to the jury, counsel, so
Yes,
you're the
but
one who
that's
is...
not what this is
you're the one who is now objecting to what was provided to the jury.
No, I'm not. She has a version that's not what's provided to the jury.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, what does the
Here's
witness
I
have?
She's got letter singular, Your Honor. I believe that's what the jury has.
Okay, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now then,
I think the answer is no.
all right, we can move on. Now, page 14, line 9. The sentence starting, I told him flat out.
Yes.
Do you recall the testimony of Lyle Menendez in which he indicated that he was afraid to speak to his father?
I'm going to object to that as beyond scope.
Sustained. Let's confine ourselves to the testimony on correct examination.
All right, page 15, line 21. Lyle Menendez indicates that it was not because of what he was doing to me. Now, do you take that? Do you understand that the he there is his father?
Yes.
And in this particular notion, would you say that that sentence is cognitively dissonant with the idea of self-defense?
I see that statement referring back to a very specific question by Dr. Oziel in which he's asking for a percentage of action. So I see that as just his being responsive to a question.
Well, the question can
But it's compounded. The question is a compounded question.
So are you saying that you can't answer my question?
Given this context, this very clear, yeah, yes.
All right. Now, moving ahead to page 17. At line 15, Dr. Oziel mentions here about talking about disinheriting, and at line 18, Lyle Menendez here rejects the notion about financial gain being part of the motive for the killing. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
All right. And you're aware of the fact that both defendants knew that this was being tape recorded, correct?
Yes.
And both defendants knew that this might be able to help them later on.
I'm going to object that calls for speculations toward both defendants. She only spoke.
Okay, counsel, you tend to argue your objections. You have an objection. The legal objection is assumes facts, not in evidence. All right, objection sustained. You may rephrase the question.
In this particular dialogue here, Dr. Oziel is suggesting certain motivations for the killings. Would that be fair to say?
That is fair to say.
And Lyle Menendez rejects that motivation.
That is correct.
Okay. And you're aware of Ms. Smith's testimony, are you not, that there was some talk that this would be used later on in trial, that this could be used later on in trial?
Yes.
Okay. Referring now to page 19. Do you have that page, Dr. Burgess?
Yes, I do.
At line 4, Lyle Menendez indicates his father cried. At line 5, he indicates his father cried. At line 21, he indicates his father cried. At line 25, he indicates his father cried. And at line 26, he indicates his father cried.
Yes.
Do you see all that?
I see all that.
All right. Do you find any inconsistency there in the notion? In other words, do you find anything about that leads you to believe that Mr. Menendez didn't cry?
I'm going to object that as beyond scope.
Overruled.
The question is, do I find that inconsistent?
Well,
I'm just reading it at face value, that he's making an observation
And-
on his father.
Do you have any reason to believe that after Lyle Menendez gives this very long monologue, that his father didn't cry during these instances?
That is what
Overruled.
is not clear, and that would have been a very good point for the therapist to explore, because this is something that is not well known, certainly hasn't been reported on about the father's crying, etc. So that would be I would have thought would have been an excellent point to move into that area.
So when Lyle Menendez
It's just not followed up on.
When Lyle Menendez says 5 times on page 19 that his father cried, you don't think that's clear enough?
No, because that's not clear enough given what everybody else has described about the father as being this very controlling type of person. So that would have been a very good opportunity to go in and just see what that was all about. It's just not, I would say that's not clear because it's inconsistent with what prior our understanding is of the family, especially in this tape.
It's inconsistent with the picture painted here in court, right?
Yes?
Okay. So did you find that cognitively dissonant?
Yes, that would have been something to inquire further into by the therapist.
I believe you indicated in your direct examination that somewhere around line 24 or somewhat that you heard Lyle Menendez's voice change. And then you talked about the fact that throughout most of this tape, his voice has a certain kind of quality, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that his voice has a flat affect?
His voice has a matter-of-fact tone. It's more of a monotone.
Would you
Flat. There is inflection. No, I wouldn't say he's totally flat. There is inflection. It is a very long tape, and so I would never characterize it as just flat.
Were you all concerned about Lyle Menendez's tone of voice in describing the killing of his parents?
No.
It's unclear what you mean by the question. Why don't you rephrase it?
As a psychologist interested in treating victims of child abuse, were you at all concerned with the tone of voice that Lyle Menendez used on this tape?
All right, are you asking her as a therapist, would the tone of voice that's displayed on the tape have any significance to her?
Yes.
In evaluating the tape recording?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. That would, again, be an area to go into and to point out. That would be something the therapist would do if there was some inconsistency that the therapist picked up. Again, you look at thoughts, feelings, and behaviors within the session.
At page 20, at line 4, Lyle Menendez uses the word decision and decided. Is that cognitively dissonant with the idea of a fearful killing in self-defense?
This is a statement that's being made within the context of his cousin Sylvia discussing it, so I don't pick that up as something that is related to the reason for the killings.
So are you ignoring the idea of my mother could not live without my father?
No, I'm not ignoring that. I think that's a theme that has been in the tape, that does come through in other parts of the tape also.
Okay. And what decision or decided, what does that refer to in your mind as a therapist, having evaluated that tape? What is he referring to?
He's referring to the interaction between the mother and the father, and the mother's feeling for the father.
And that involved a decision on Lyle Menendez's part?
He is, well, I think you have to look at the whole, this is quite a long discussion or soliloquy from Lyle Menendez starting on page 18. And it is in the context also of the crying, and comes down to his final statement here about the mother living or not living without the father.
Now, you are aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez was responsible for his mother not living, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And so when it says here that he's talking about a decision, my mother could not live without my father, do you take that to mean anything else than the decision to kill his mother?
Oh, I don't put that in that context. As I said, you have to look at this whole long issue here that he's going over, and especially that he's interjected about his cousin Sylvia.
So would your answer be no, the decision didn't have anything to do with the mother living without the father?
You know, I'm going to object this argument. It's too big an issue.
All right, objection sustained. Rephrase the question.
So Dr. Burgess, when Lyle says, so it came down to that decision and we decided that my mother could not live without my father, it is your understanding that he is not referring to the decision to kill his mother. Is that correct? Yes or no?
I'm going to object to that last little argument.
Overruled.
Again, that was something out of context, and I think that you have to look at this interaction that he has with the relatives and what's being said and all of that. And from that standpoint, I think that's what he is referring to.
What is he referring to?
Well, he's gone through a whole long list of things about the father crying, about his sitting with his father at the Super Bowl, and then he is at the very tail end of the crying that he also brings in about cousin Sylvia, who has made certain statements about what she thought happened, and then he makes a statement about the decision.
And what does the decision refer to then in your mind?
The decision has this theme that has been coming from Dr. Oziel about the mother being so miserable and the father being this, making her miserable. That is a theme that has been coming through in the tape.
And so they decided to do something about the mother's misery, right?
That is a theme, yes.
And
That makes no sense.
it makes no sense to you.
That's right.
Okay. Referring now to page 21, line 5. When Lyle Menendez says at line 5, but I still don't think it had anything to do with, killing him had nothing to do with us. Do you find that to be cognitively dissonant with the idea of the self-defense?
No, this is already been asked.
Overruled.
This is following up on Dr. Oziel, who is making the statement, and what you see is Lyle rejecting that at that particular time. If you go back to page 20, is a statement made by Dr. Oziel. And he's responding to it. I still don't think it had anything to do with him, killing him.
Right. Lyle Menendez is saying killing him, my father, had nothing to do with us.
He's denying the point being made by Dr. Oziel about hatred and all of that and controlling, et cetera, as being a motive, as being a reason. And he's rejecting that. I think what I see is Lyle rejecting that particular theory.
Well, he's saying that killing his father had nothing to do with us, meaning he and his brother. Correct? Isn't that what he said?
Yes.
All right. And so you don't find that cognitively dissonant with the idea of self-defense. Would that be fair to say? Yes or no?
No.
Now, you're aware of the fact, then, that before this tape was made, there was some lead time wherein the defendants knew that they were going to be making the tape, correct?
Objection, non-possible, that's not moving.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
I believe you indicated you talked to Erik Menendez and he told you about this phone call that preceded the making of the tape, correct?
The phone, yes, back in late November.
All right, and the tape.
That was a phone call that said that Dr. Oziel wanted to see the brothers, that he felt uncomfortable that he hadn't heard from them, and he wanted to see them.
And wanted to, and you indicated when I asked you the question, you volunteered this information, correct? About
Well, then there
the
were
phone
some
call.
sessions.
I'm going to object to the form of the question with argument.
Overruled. Counsel, don't argue. Overruled.
Okay, I asked you if
But
you.
again, don't argue with the witness either.
Okay, do you recall
Rephrase the
me?
question.
Do you recall me asking you if you had inquired of Erik Menendez how the tape came to be made?
Yes.
And you indicated in your answer that it started with a phone call from Dr. Oziel to Erik Menendez. Is that correct?
Saying that he wanted to see him and see the brothers. Not the phone call didn't have anything to do with the tape. It was to make another session.
Did you misunderstand my question then when I asked you if you talked to him about the making of Erik about the making of the tape?
Why don't you just ask her that question then?
Well, what was your understanding from Erik Menendez as to how much time elapsed between when he knew he was going to make the tape and the making of the tape?
The making of the tape, as I understand, they were at Dr. Oziel's office for a length of time. And I don't know when the tape was made because there's no time on it. But there was a length of time on that December 11th when the tape was made. I can't answer it any more specifically than that.
And so you don't know if a day before or days before or months before these defendants knew that they would be making a tape. Is that fair to say?
I don't know precisely when they knew they were going to be making this tape.
And you don't know if they did anything to prepare themselves to make the tape either. Is that correct?
Well, there was this discussion that, see, the tape, that December 11th, there's a length of time that goes on, so we don't know what is said there.
Are you finished with your answer?
finished.
All right. Page 28, line 19. It indicates Erik Menendez is speaking, and he says, he was somebody that I loved and almost had no choice to do what I did. Do you see the word there, almost?
Yes.
Do you find that word cognitively dissonant with the idea of the neurobiological response to fear?
No.
You don't.
No, just the word almost.
Right.
was put in there, rather than no choice.
Well, he did say almost on the tape,
Yes,
correct?
he did. Right.
All right. And Dr. Oziel did not suggest that anywhere prior to page 28, did he?
Objection on calls for conclusion.
Overruled.
I didn't see that earlier.
All right. So Dr. Oziel did not suggest to Lyle Menendez anything about his particular state of mind on the night of the killings, correct?
Objection on that calls for conclusion.
Sustained. Objection sustained.
Dr. Burgess, when Erik Menendez says almost had no choice, isn't that inconsistent with the idea of him being in some sort of neurobiological fear response?
I'm going to object to this on behalf of Lyle Menendez. This is improper cross-examination in front of our jury.
Overruled. It's just a generic description of this fear response. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I think what's important in this statement is he is talking about his father as someone that he loved, and he is also putting into this statement not only that he had no choice, almost no choice, and he hates himself for what happened. I think all of those things are in that statement, and that's very, there's a lot of feeling in that as well as statement. And I would not see that as inconsistent.
Okay, so you don't see it inconsistent. Do you see any inconsistency between having no choice and almost having no choice? Do you think those are the same thing?
Given the complexity of this sentence, I think, and also don't forget that Dr. Oziel does not know the real reason why this is being made. You mean this, what's actually going on, the reason for making, what actually happened in making the tape. I think that has to be taken into consideration. He's not about to absolutely reveal the real reason.
Now, you talked about metaphors and clues throughout this transcript. Did you see any metaphors or clues as to the real events the evening of August the 20th of 1989? In other words, the need for self-defense.
Yes.
Okay, could you point those out to me?
Well, I think in the last pages, what you see really coming to the surface, if it had been followed up on, were aspects of the last week with a focus on the last 2 or 3 days.
All right, so when Lyle Menendez talks about, well, we really didn't want to think about it too much because the feeling of not having your parents around would get in the way of what was more important, that indicates to you
That indicates survival.
Okay, and when he talks about, uses the word callously at page 45, line 10.
Right.
Okay, that to you is a cue or a metaphor for the need to defend oneself?
No, that would be seen as almost non-thinking, that the automatic, what you just referred to, the automatic aspect coming in, it was done so quickly. Again, the non-planning, I see that as automatic response and consistent with self-defense, yes.
All right, now referring back to page 29 at line 11, where Erik Menendez is speaking. He indicates the word eventually it had to happen. Do you find the use of the word eventually to be cognitively dissonant with the idea of immediate self-defense?
I object to this in front of Lyle Menendez jury. Beyond scope.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what the page? Could you give me the page again?
Page 29, line 11.
Line 11. Yes.
Okay, and when Erik Menendez says eventually it had to happen, it was basically ruining my life and I guess Lyle's and he was putting my mother through torture. Do you find this to be cognitively dissonant with the idea of immediate self-defense?
I don't see it cognitively dissonant. I think that what we also talked about on that is what was basically ruining his life. And if you could have explored that, I think that Dr. Oziel would have gotten more of an answer for that whole sentence.
And I take it it's your supposition that if Dr. Oziel had explored this, that the real meaning here is he's talking about the sexual abuse, correct?
Yes.
And he says that it was ruining Lyle's life and putting his mother through torture. Is that correct?
Well, again, the word torture, that's a very important word that's used. Torture is a strong word.
Well, I wasn't asking you about the meaning of the word torture. I was asking you that if, in fact, you interpret this as a vague reference to the sex abuse, how is it that the sex abuse would have been ruining Lyle's life and putting the mother through torture? How can you reconcile that?
I can reconcile that because he's getting so close to the statement about what really is happening, but Dr. Oziel has no idea what is happening, and Erik Menendez is being very clear, and he's saying he guesses Lyle's because this affects the whole family. This is very, very important for the whole family and what's going on in the family.
And so when he says eventually, you don't find that in any way contradicts the idea of the immediate self-defense. Is that your testimony here?
Yes.
Now, page 30, Erik Menendez goes on and he talks about the fact that he wishes that his mother and he would have had an extremely close relationship and he could tell her everything that happened over it, and I would tell her everything and all my relationships with different people. Did you
Yes.
ever ask Erik Menendez what he meant by all my relationships with different people?
I didn't specifically ask that, but I certainly talked with him at great length to know about relationships with people.
You are aware of the fact that he was basically forced by his mother to talk about getting a girlfriend within a 6-month period, correct?
Yes.
All right, so it is clear that when he talks about relationship with different people, he's not talking about the girlfriends, right? Because
You're in a call for speculation.
Sustain.
did you ever ask Erik Menendez?
I'd like to approach.
All right, you may do that. We're now ready to resume with the examination of the witness. You may proceed.
Dr. Burgess, at page 31, line 9. Erik Menendez indicates, first of all, at the beginning of this particular conversation, which starts on page 30, Erik Menendez indicates that he could leave and he could make money if he needed to, correct?
Yes.
All right, and that is something so therefore he's rejecting the idea that Dr. Oziel has offered earlier about this being done because of the disinheritance, correct?
Yes.
All right, and then he says here that at line 9 that my mother had to be killed and it was the only way out for her.
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you find that particular explanation inconsistent with a neurobiological response to a fear situation?
Well, see, this is the one notion that that Erik Menendez does agree with Dr. Oziel, and this is what I've always previously said. It doesn't make any sense, but he does say it. Yes. So
Okay.
it is not. I'm not connecting that with the neurobiology of fear. This is something that he is going along with Dr. Oziel.
But it's very clear within the same conversation, isn't it, that Erik Menendez is perfectly capable of rejecting suggestions by Dr. Oziel, correct?
Yes.
And he rejects the idea of the disinheritance as being a motivation.
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying now that even though he rejects the disinheritance portion of Dr. Oziel's suggestion, he is adopting this notion that mom had to be killed. Is that correct?
Yes, because they have to come up with, to placate Dr. Oziel, they've got to come up with something. Otherwise, they have to tell the real reason.
Okay.
So that is what I see as the reason.
And would you agree that what they came up with, the idea of a mercy killing, is something that looks less egregious or less serious than a premeditated murder?
Well, it certainly helps their guilt.
All right. So this is something that helps them, correct?
Their guilt, yes.
All right. Now, down below, he talks about a dream. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any indication from the four corners of this transcript whether this dream occurred before or after the homicides? You see here at line 18
Yes,
on
no.
page 31, he says, I have all kinds of dreams about it. And when he says it, do you know what he's referring to there?
It doesn't say specifically here what the it refers to. That's right. That should have been followed up on.
All right, but in your interpretation of what Erik Menendez is talking about, is he talking about dreams that he's having after he killed his parents or before?
This is, I believe, after, because of the constant thinking of what has happened. And that this is, I think that the word heart certainly gets at the emotional aspect. So this is something that he is stating here, a recent dream.
All right, so it's your understanding then that this refers to something after the homicides, correct?
Yes.
On page 32, line 11. Erik Menendez is indicating that one of the hardest things about his relationships with people is they don't even know the truth. Do you see that particular
Yes, I
portion
do.
there?
Yes,
Right.
I do.
Now, did you reject the idea that what he was talking about here was they don't know the truth, that I'm the one who killed my parents?
No, I think that this is what I've testified to before would be an excellent area for further explanation, since it uses the word truth and would get at perhaps the truth of what happened in that last week.
Now, I believe that you've indicated that Dr. Oziel was not a good therapist during the session, correct?
He didn't, yes.
All right. And does that in any way negate the abilities of the defendants to plan out their parents' murder? In other words, the fact that he was a bad therapist, does that have anything to do with whether on August the 20th and August the 18th these defendants plan out their parents' murder?
It is argumentative, sustained.
Okay. Dr. Burgess, the fact that Dr. Oziel was not a good therapist has nothing to do with the defendant's state of mind on August the 20th. Would you agree with that?
Object to that, Your Honor, as to approach.
Overruled.
Would you agree with that?
Could you repeat that again?
The fact that Dr. Oziel might not have been a good therapist during the session has nothing to do with the defendant's state of mind on the night of August the 20th.
Objection argumentative.
Overruled. You understand the question?
Yes, I'm
regarding
thinking.
the session here.
Yeah, the session here, in terms of Dr. Oziel's technique in no way addresses that particular point, which would be very, very critical to get at, and he just misses it. So his technique, I think, does bear on helping these brothers with what they come to him.
But my question really is, Dr. Burgess, that if he was a bad therapist on December the 11th, that doesn't change the fact of what the defendants were actually thinking on August the 20th, does it?
It is argumentative.
Okay. Dr. Burgess, if Dr. Oziel is a bad therapist, does that mean the defendants didn't plan to kill their parents?
Objection, Your Honor. The answer is yes.
Sustained.
Referring to page 33, line 14.
Why doesn't he tell Ms. Bazanich to move on? He has no problem telling uh, Leslie Abramson to move on from questions that she can't get in because she can't phrase it correctly or whatever. And so, yeah, and this whole cross-examination has been partially argumentative.
Erik Menendez has a discourse here about college and his difficulties with his father about going to college.
Objection. The state's the evidence calls for conclusion.
Overruled.
Do you understand the portion in the passage that I'm referring to?
Yes, I see where he starts by going to college, yes.
Are there any cues in here that indicate that Erik Menendez was upset because he was going to have to come home a couple of nights a week?
He doesn't specifically say it in this one passage. What he does bring up is one of the events that does occur in this last week, where he is talking with his father about courses to take.
Okay, and so he does refer specifically to the last week then, in your interpretation of this, correct?
Yes.
And in referring to the last week, he doesn't mention, there are no cues in here about the fact that he was going to have to come home from college. Would that be your testimony?
Well, if you move over to 34, I think that if you begin to get into feeling states, and on line 9, he talks about scared. There is the freedom in my life. There are clear words that could be followed up by Dr. Oziel that are missed, and does suggest as I said, scared is a very clear word.
Okay, now line 5, where he says, I would have freedom outside of structure. Is that cognitively dissonant from the idea of having to come home a couple nights a week to suffer further abuse?
Well, he thought he was going to be able to stay at school. So that, right, if he could stay at school, that would not be consistent. Is that gets changed and is told he has to come home. That relates to the last week.
Yes, but this tape was made several months after the homicides, isn't that true?
Yes.
And at that time, he would have already known that his father wanted him to come home a couple of nights a week, wouldn't
Yes.
he?
But he's not able to tell Dr. Oziel this, and Dr. Oziel doesn't follow up on important areas that might get at the real reason.
All right, so when he talks about I would have freedom outside of structure, then would that be a cue that his father was really going to have him come home 2 nights a week?
That would be a clue to Dr. Oziel to further investigate. That's the whole point of looking at the way the therapy is progressing, or the session is progressing.
Now, earlier you indicated that when Lyle Menendez said mother, he really meant brother, correct? And that was a metaphor.
State's your testimony.
Oops. Objection sustained. Rephrase the question.
At one point, you indicated that when Lyle Menendez used the term mother, he meant brother.
Objection.
Why don't you ask her?
It was a metaphor for brother. Do you remember that?
Yes, I said that was a possible metaphor for brother, yes.
Okay. Do you see any metaphors in this dialogue about college that would be a metaphor for Erik Menendez having to come home to suffer further abuse?
Well, I think what you just said, the freedom outside of the structure, what structure, what freedom, these are all terms that could be further explored.
So that's your answer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let me go on. I believe you were critical during the part where, I think it was referred to by Ms. Abramson, of the touchy-feely part. I think you were critical of Dr. Oziel because he laughed. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Do you think that laughter can relieve tension?
Laughter can relieve, I would agree, yes, in certain contexts.
And would you agree that when Dr. Oziel is trying to get the brothers to hug, that there was some sort of tension going on?
Objection. Your Honor. Calls for
No, because he was laughing at the brothers because they didn't want to do it. He wasn't laughing to ease tension for anybody. Dr. Oziel wasn't tense. It was the boys who were tense. So why would Dr. Oziel be laughing? This is stupid. Like, all this questioning is stupid, if you ask me.
Overruled.
I think there was a lot of protest and clear statements that they didn't want to do this.
All right, and that would be a tension-producing situation, correct?
It certainly would be, yes.
And laughter would be a way of alleviating that kind of tension, correct?
No, I could not agree to that. I think laughter, when you're negating clear statements by a patient that they don't want to do something, and the therapist says, well, I don't care what you think, that is demeaning of the patient. That is not respectful, and I could not agree that laughter in any way was a proper or even an idea that should be tried.
All right, so in spite of the tension that might have been produced at that moment, you think laughter was inappropriate. Is that correct?
argumentative.
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay, now page 42, line 6. Lyle Menendez is talking, and he says, there was no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Erik's consent.
Yes.
Do you find that cognitively dissonant with the idea of self-defense?
I think this is a very...
Are you withdrawing any objection?
No, I am.
So am I. Same thing.
Okay, why don't you rephrase the question?
You find that cognitively dissonant with the idea of a neurobiological response to fear?
No.
You don't?
No, I think that this is an important segment that really does speak to something that is very clearly comes out in the last week.
Okay, so the decision to kill the mother to you is consistent with a neurobiological response to fear, is that correct?
Yes.
And where in the neurobiological response to fear is decision-making allowed?
It's not decision-making, it's an automatic response to feeling fear, where the issue is survival. And it's that's what the fear response is and why the fight phenomenon comes into play.
But Dr. Burgess, if it's an automatic response, then that would mean you couldn't make a decision, right?
Because what is going on here is they're coming to grips with more information, if you want me to go into it, that happened in that last week, and where they have to now take into consideration the position of the mother vis-a-vis this whole family interaction that has been discussed about in the tape.
And when Lyle Menendez says at line 7, I didn't even want to influence him in that issue. I just let him sleep on it for a couple days.
Yes.
You do not find that scenario of sleeping on it for a couple of days to be inconsistent with a neurobiological response to fear. Would that be correct?
Right, because you have to, first of all, if you could find out what it was that he had to sleep on, the idea, that could have been explored. I've already said that in terms of what Dr. Oziel might be able to get into, but more importantly, that is precisely those last days just before that Sunday. That's exactly what's going on. It's coming to grips with that, what's going on in the family.
And you wouldn't say then that he was coming to grips with the idea of making a decision to kill his parents?
Not in the planning sense, no. I would not agree with you in terms of a plan to do that. This is something that a fear response is automatic when the fear builds enough, and then the response is enacted.
At line 16, I believe you discussed this morning with Ms. Abramson, Lyle Menendez expresses being upset with his relatives because they didn't do something to help when they knew what was going on. Do you see that particular discourse there at 16 and 17?
Yes.
Okay. Do you in any way find this to be a reference to sexual abuse? Do you find this as a clue for sexual abuse?
Well, it certainly is something that needed to be explored. What did he find out?
Well, I'm not asking you what should have been done. I'm asking you, do you find this to be a clue to sexual abuse?
It certainly, if it's explored, could well be.
Well, but are you...
You can't interpret that without it. That's why I'm saying you have to explore it to bring into the session what the content is.
And so you would explore that to find out what the relatives knew, correct?
Well, you want to know what he found out. When I found out, I did something about it.
Which is, please kill me. That's at line 19. I found out, I did something about it. I did what I thought my mother would want me to do, which is please kill me.
Well, that goes back to that odd notion of mercy killing.
Now, I believe you've indicated, though, that the notion of mercy killing is something which tends to mitigate the crime, correct?
Objector, that's not the witness's testimony.
Rephrase the question.
And mercy killing certainly is less morally reprehensible than a premeditated murder, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, this calls for argument, speculation.
Improper opinion.
All right, objection sustained.
Would you agree that a mercy killing is more psychologically palatable than a premeditated murder?
Objection, Your Honor, that's calls for improper opinion.
It's unclear what you mean. Palatable to who?
Palatable to the person who committed the crime. If the person believes that the crime was committed for the purpose of mercy rather than a cold-blooded way, would that be a way of making someone feel better?
To relieve the guilt, yes, that's one way of expressing it.
And that would be something that a therapist would want to do, is to relieve the guilt, correct?
Well, we'd want to talk about it. I mean, that's the whole point, is to bring that into the therapy session and to find out more and what would be the next step. That's precisely what would be very useful at this particular point.
Well, Lyle Menendez says at line 21, I wanted to get rid of the source. I couldn't live without. Nobody could. Do you see that particular passage there?
Yes.
And I take it you can reconcile that with the idea of the neurobiological response to fear. Is that correct?
Well, what I reconcile it with is that that's something that should be explored and that you've got to find out more about that. He is giving some kind of clue that needs to be made more explicit into the therapy.
When he says at line 20, I just couldn't just kill my mom, that would be ridiculous. I wanted to get rid of the source there. Did you take that to understand the source to be his father?
Well, that again goes to the reason that Dr. Oziel suggests, is that because mother is so miserable, then therefore father has made her miserable, and so that is kind of the notion that they agree to.
Okay,
so I see it as that.
So you do take it as the source is referring to getting rid of the father, correct? The source being the father.
Well, I said that I would think that should be further explored. That one explanation is that this rather odd notion that has been suggested that they feel they have to placate Dr. Oziel, they're going to come up with. So that's one explanation. The second is to explore it and find out what exactly is the source and what is going on. There may be more going on.
When Lyle Menendez says, I just couldn't kill my mom, that would be ridiculous, I wanted to get rid of the source, is that cognitively dissonant with the idea of a neurobiological response to fear with no decision-making involved?
At this particular point, I believe he is signing on or agreeing with this notion of father is making mother miserable, and so therefore they both, that was the reason for the killings.
And so he's agreeing with the notion that the killing was done in a manner which indicated planning, correct?
No, not the necessarily indicated planning, but is agreeing with Dr. Oziel. They have to come up with some explanation.
Page 44. line 24, when Lyle Menendez says, even the planning of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was one, because it could have happened at any moment. And then he says at page 45, all the thinking beforehand was done. Okay, now do you find the notion of thinking beforehand to be inconsistent with the idea of a neurobiological response to fear?
No, not when you know what was going on beforehand in that last few days about what the danger was, which speaks to it could happen at any moment, that the reactive response, to be on guard. That's the way I see that statement. It's a real clear hint.
They were on an even higher alert than normal, because when you live with someone who mistreats you constantly on a daily basis, you already walk on eggshells. So at this point in time, things had escalated so bad that they were even more aware of their surroundings and aware of what the parents were doing because they were so fearful. That's why when they said that them going and watching TV and shutting the door in the family room where they were watching TV, just shutting the door was a trigger to the boys because they thought that the parents were planning on hurting them by closing the door, and they were having like a secret meeting about the boys. That's what the boys were thinking because the door was locked, and like, why are they keeping us out? What do they want us to know? They must be talking about us, type of like paranoia because you're so scared and fearful. I totally get where they're coming from. I totally see, I get it. I've been maybe not as fearful or in such a bad state as them, but I get the fear and that walking on eggshells. It's terrifying.
At the self-defense.
So you're going outside the tape and interjecting what you know about what the defense is in this case to evaluate that particular segment. Is that correct?
Well, you asked me about this, could have happened at any moment, and I don't see that as a planning type of behavior.
All right, so when Lyle Menendez says at page 45, all the thinking beforehand was done, that does not indicate to you, that is not inconsistent with the, excuse me, let me restate that. When he says all the thinking beforehand was done,
yes,
you can reconcile that with your opinion that this was a disorganized crime, correct?
Yes. Well, the thinking is relating to the danger.
How do you know that?
Well, because you just asked me about how does this relate to planning versus non-planning versus all of that?
No, but
Just giving you
on page 44 he says the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was one, because it could have happened at any moment. All the thinking beforehand was done. All right,
yes,
and I take it that you can reconcile that with your testimony here in court earlier, that this was a crime which was disorganized and unplanned.
Yes.
Even though thinking beforehand were words used by Lyle Menendez on this tape.
Well, thinking is a cognitive function, and of course something comes into thinking. The thinking has to do with what's going on in that last week. So that you don't, out of nowhere, get a response. There has to be something that's motivated the response.
So when he talks about thinking beforehand and planning out of this, you don't find that all inconsistent with your theory that this was an unplanned crime. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Especially when you have the information about that last week.
All right, but I believe your testimony so far has been principally confined to the four corners of this transcript,
That
correct?
is correct.
I'm going to take that's argumentative if the question.
Overruled. Your answer will stand.
Now, at the bottom of page 45, Lyle Menendez indicates that you don't kill your parents line 26 on page 45. You don't kill your parents based on a little word here, a little word there. Do you see that particular portion?
Yes, I do.
Okay, do you find that inconsistent with the idea of the neurobiological response to fear?
Yes.
You find that inconsistent?
No, I'm saying, I'm sorry,
that was actually the end of my question.
Okay,
That
sorry.
particular phrase that you don't kill your parents just on a word here and a word there.
Yes.
Okay, do you from that infer that you kill them for another reason?
Well, I think he goes on to say that the tremendous amount of emotion was there, that there obviously was much more of an emotional kind of state.
Well,
and he's saying that there is much more there than any I think that's what's important.
But at line 9 on that same page, and in the same discourse, without interruption from Dr. Oziel, Lyle Menendez says at line 9, it was done so quickly and so sort of callously almost. Because one, if you thought about it too much, the feelings of not having your parents around and so on.
All right, if you could just focus on what it is you want to ask.
All right, starting with the word callously at line 10 and ending at the word important on line 13. Do you see that particular passage?
Yes.
On page 45?
Yes, Your Honor. All right, and when Lyle Menendez...
Overruled. Overruled.
Do you see that particular passage, Dr. Burgess?
Yes.
And when you review that particular passage about the callousness, does that in any way, do you find that at all cognitively dissonant with the idea of a neurobiological response to fear?
No.
Overruled. The answer will stand.
When Lyle Menendez says at page 46, line 4 through 5, and he indicates that it's almost as if a third party was discussing.
Yes.
Okay. And what is your psychological evaluation of that particular choice of words within the confines of this transcript?
Well, that would be another example. He doesn't ask about this third party, so that we don't have any more information than what is exactly on this transcript. That's another missed area.
No, but I'm not asking you what Dr. Oziel did wrong. I'm asking you, when Lyle Menendez says almost as if a third party was discussing, did you find that to have any psychological significance in terms of your evaluation of this as a disorganized crime?
Yes.
And you thought that that was consistent with your theory?
That's a numbing kind of reaction that you get in the face of fear. That's one explanation.
Now, at line 12 through 15, Lyle Menendez appears to be speaking about that he had an important issue to do and his brother was out playing tennis.
Yes.
Okay. Well, he indicates that he was practicing because he had a tournament coming up.
Okay, counsel, let's not argue it. Well, which lines you want her to read?
Line 14 through 16.
On page 46?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, I think I better reserve this for the Erik Menendez jury. I'm sorry, I'd like to go on.
Okay.
Now, when Lyle Menendez makes the comparison of missing his parents to missing his dog, do you attach any psychological significance to that particular analogy?
Objection, Your Honor, that's beyond the scope of this standard.
Overruled.
It can be.
All right, and when on line 3 at page 47, he indicates, I hated the thing when it was around. Do you see that as a metaphor for his parents?
No, I would not. I don't know enough about that. Again, you'd have to get more on that thing. Is generally means I don't know what that's related to.
Well, on the page before, line 25 on page 46, he talks about missing his dog. And then he goes on at line 3 on page 47, and he says that, whether I hated the thing when it was around and I'd given it away and now it's gone, I miss all the things. Okay?
Yes.
Do you see that as being a metaphor for his parents? He's talking about his dog there, isn't he?
Objection, Your Honor, that's all perspective.
Yeah.
Overruled.
Yes, I would. I don't think that would. I think the missing the dog around, I think, really speaks to the isolation. That is an issue with this family in terms of people, animals, and so forth. The thing, I think, I don't see that as a metaphor. It doesn't have a person attached to it or a statement. I would not consider that a metaphor.
And when he says he's making a gross analogy between missing his parents and missing his dog, you don't find anything psychologically significant about that, do you?
Overruled. Overruled. Overruled.
Can you answer the
I
question?
thought I just answered it. That speaks to the isolation aspect.
And when he talks about hating the thing when it was around, you don't find that he's referring to his parents. Is that correct?
Overruled.
No, I would not make that at this, given the last few pages of this transcript.
And even though he used the term analogy in that last part of page 46, he analogizes the dog to his parents, but you're rejecting the idea that if he hated his dog, he hated his parents. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think he talks about missing people, he misses parents, he misses his dog. I think that's a statement, a fair statement of his, but I don't make that giant leap to the next page, no.
Thank you.
Redirect.
That was kind of painful to watch. I don't like Ms. Bazanich, at least not her questioning style, anyways. But okay, so that's done now. Redirect.
Well, it's going to start. Yeah.
Dr. Burgess, when you began your analysis of the tape, before you even listened to it, it was your understanding, was it not, that neither Erik nor Lyle Menendez went into this session in order to tell Dr. Oziel the truth?
That's correct.
Objection. Call for speculation on part of the witness answer.
Sustain the answer straight.
Mrs. Bozanich asked if you had a conversation with Erik Menendez about the making of this tape.
Yes.
And did Erik tell you that he had no intention of telling Dr. Oziel the truth during the making of this tape?
Objection.
Overruled.
Yes.
And did he tell you that he had had discussions with his brother about the limitations that would be placed on what they were prepared to talk to Dr. Oziel about?
Yes.
So you don't believe, do you, that when you're reading these words about mercy killing, that certainly Erik Menendez intended that to be the truth, do you?
Objection. Call for improper opinion.
Sustain.
Mrs. Bozanich asked you if some of the things that are said here are inconsistent with self-defense.
Yes.
Now, the notion of this mercy killing is certainly inconsistent with self-defense, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But you don't believe that mercy killing was the reason, do you?
Objection.
Forming your opinion.
Improper opinion as to her beliefs.
Sustain.
I think you've indicated that this notion of mercy killing is an odd concept.
Yes, I did.
What's odd about it?
Objection. Irrelevant.
Sustain.
Why do you say that it's odd in the context of this tape?
Same objection. Irrelevant.
Sustain.
It appears that this is, Mrs. Bozanich asked you about your knowledge of Dr. Oziel's testimony concerning October 31st and November 2nd. Do you recall her questions?
Yes.
And are you have in mind that Dr. Oziel claimed under oath that Erik and Lyle Menendez said they killed their father because he was controlling and dominating and they hated him?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Are you aware of what Dr. Oziel's theories were as to why these killings occurred based on his testimony?
Objection. Mischaracterizes his testimony.
Why don't you clarify that?
Are you familiar with Dr. Oziel's testimony concerning what reasons he claims were given to him by the Menendez brothers on October 31st and November 2nd for the killing of the parents?
Yes, I am.
And what were these reasons according to Dr. Oziel's sworn testimony under oath?
There are several reasons.
Yes, which one?
Okay, first would be the money, the disinheritance, the greed. Then he suggested the hatred.
Your Honor, you just strike the witness's testimony as mischaracterizing the testimony of Dr. Oziel.
Well, she can be wrong.
Your objection is that you don't agree with her answer.
mischaracterizes the testimony.
All right, that objection is overruled.
Okay, let me just slow you down. One of the things he testified to was that they were upset about being disinherited.
Correct.
Okay. And what else were the reasons that he said?
He said that the father was negative and controlling.
Did he use the word, in fact, domineering and
Okay, let's not lead the witness.
Okay.
Yes, used the word domineering.
Okay.
Also, that it was money, greed.
Okay. What about notions of hatred versus love? Did he offer theories on that?
Yes, he believed that, or he stated it was for hatred
Okay.
of the father.
And did he offer reasons with respect to the mother?
Yes.
And what reasons did he claim about the mother?
He offered that mother was miserable, and that was one of the reasons being the mercy killing.
And did he offer another reason with respect to mother?
Yes, he did.
And what was that reason?
He offered that mother was a witness and needed to be, that was the reason, to eliminate her as a witness.
Okay. And was there some notion in Dr. Oziel's testimony that the primary person to be killed was father,
That is correct, yes.
based on hatred and domination and control?
Yes.
And mother was...
Counsel, you are leading the witness.
I understand. And were there other things that Dr. Oziel testified to by way of the motive or the triggering events for the shooting?
I think that we said disinheritance was one.
Apart from the family relationship.
That there had been something, he had seen something.
He being who?
That the brothers had seen something, and that was motivated the killings.
Okay. And what about the notions of perfect plans or perfect murders?
That was said as yes, the perfect plan, the perfect crime.
Now, that's what Dr. Oziel said were things that he claimed Erik and Lyle Menendez told him.
Yes.
Correct. And on the course of this tape, do you see Dr. Oziel using the word domineering and controlling with respect to the father?
Yes, I do.
And Mrs. Bozanich asked you, do Erik and Lyle Menendez agree with that?
They do not agree with that.
And do you see Dr. Oziel during the course of the tape trying to put the father in a negative light?
Yes, I do.
And do you hear Erik or Lyle Menendez say they hated their father?
No, I do not.
And do you hear Dr. Oziel trying to put the mother in a negative light as being ungrateful to her sons for their efforts on her behalf?
Yes, I do.
And do you hear them talking about hating or disliking the mother?
No, they do not say that.
Is there any mention here by either Erik or Lyle Menendez or even Dr. Oziel that mother was killed because she was a witness to something?
No, there's no mention of that.
And is there any mention in anywhere on this tape that things were precipitated by anybody seeing anything outside the family?
No.
Is there any mention by anybody of the notion of a perfect plan, a perfect crime, or a perfect murder?
No.
And when Dr. Oziel does keep bringing up the notion that disinheritance has something to do with it, is that accepted or rejected by the Menendez brothers?
That is rejected by the brothers.
Now, does it appear to you that the only thing that Dr. Oziel testified to as being agreed to or being stated by the Menendez brothers that they do appear to agree with here was the mercy-killing notion?
Objection called for conclusion by witness.
Sustained.
Are you familiar with Dr. Oziel's testimony in which he said that neither of the brothers ever said they loved their parents or their father?
Yes.
And did you note the number of times in this transcript that both Erik and Lyle Menendez talk about how they loved their parents, loved their father, loved their mother?
Yes, that was stated many times.
Now, when you talked about the fact that the notion of a mercy killing can help with one's guilt, did you mean guilt in the legal sense or did you mean guilt in the emotional sense?
I meant guilt in the emotional sense.
And do you recall reading Lyle Menendez's testimony that at the November 2nd session, he and Erik agreed with Dr. Oziel on the mercy killing theory because it seemed to make Erik feel better?
Call for speculation.
Sustained.
Now, how does the notion of a mercy killing, do you see any evidence here that Erik or Lyle Menendez were feeling better because of this notion of a mercy killing?
Objection called for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you recall? I am going to be at least...
How much longer do you think?
About
15?
20 minutes.
Okay. All right, is there any examination by the co-defendant, or is it all going to be done in this?
I think I'll be...
Okay, we'll give you a chance then to confer on that as well. We'll resume at 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume at 1:30.
Dr. Burgess, Mrs. Bozanich asked you on cross-examination if you were aware of the fact that Judalon Smith made prior statements that were inconsistent with things she testified to at the trial.
Yes.
And she asked you those questions from the viewpoint, did she not, of whether it was appropriate for you to rely on anything Judalon Smith says?
Yes.
Are you aware of the fact that the police arrested Erik and Lyle Menendez and that they were held without bail for 2 years solely on the word of Judalon Smith?
Objection argumentative and it's been checked on that.
Sustained.
Are you aware that it was Judalon Smith's information to the police, as she testified to, that resulted in the arrest of Erik and Lyle Menendez?
Objection is in fact not negative.
Sustained.
That was testified to, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
Are you aware of the fact that it was Judalon Smith's word that was relied upon for a search warrant for Dr. Oziel's home?
Yes, I am.
And that word was relied upon by the police in formulating that search warrant?
Objection argumentative and calls for conclusion.
Sustained.
Do you know who wrote the search warrant in the case that was served on Dr. Oziel's home? What agency?
Your Honor, objection irrelevant.
It is irrelevant, and it is irrelevant.
Now, Mrs. Bozanich asked you if there's training of therapists to deal with people who have confessed to violent acts and how to deal with such patients.
Yes.
She also asked you if you were aware that this tape was made in Dr. Oziel's office before Erik and Lyle were arrested following Ms. Smith's interview.
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you hear anything in Dr. Oziel's voice on that tape where he sounded fearful?
Objection calls for the conclusion of speculation.
Sustained.
Did you
Answer
analyze the tape from the viewpoint of the affect of you've been asked about Lyle Menendez's tone of voice, have you not?
Yes, I have.
You were asked about Erik Menendez's tone of voice?
Yes, I
Did
was.
you scrutinize Dr. Oziel's tone of voice?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear fear?
No, I
Objection
didn't.
calls for speculation for the witness.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Did you hear emotion?
Objection states objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation. Lack of foundation.
Sustained.
Well, then I ask that all the testimony concerning Lyle Menendez's tone of voice elicited by Mrs. Bozanich be stricken.
As well as that elicited by Ms. Erik.
Yes, it was covered on direct and cross as to the defendant's tone of voice. Objection or request is denied. You may
Does
ask the
Dr.
next question.
Oziel say on the tape at any time that he is afraid of the defendant?
No, he does not.
Does he say that he is nervous around them?
No, he does not.
Are you aware of Ms. Smith's testimony that he specifically asked her not to be there that day?
Yes, I am.
Now, you recall Mrs. Bozanich questioning you about whether it was inconsistent that Erik says in this tape that he found the original suicide note in a drawer under a book
Yes.
as compared to his testimony at the trial that it was lying around the house.
Yes.
Do you find the testimony of Erik consistent with the information from Dr. Summerfield that Kitty Menendez told Dr. Summerfield that she purposely left that note around for Erik to find it?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Are you familiar with the information in Dr. Summerfield's notes that Kitty Menendez said she purposely left that suicide note around for her son to find?
Objection calls for hearsay as well.
Right, that's already been introduced, so objection overruled.
Yes.
And is that consistent with Erik's testimony that he found it lying around the house?
Yes, it is consistent.
And is the fact that this is a note under a book in a drawer to which he obviously has access inconsistent with it being around the house?
No, it is not.
Now, you were directed by Mrs. Bozanich to that section of one of Lyle Menendez's monologues, if you will, in this tape, to where he mentions several times that his father cried. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And you said that this was inconsistent with your understanding because it was inconsistent with the information that was presented about the father.
That is correct.
And do you recall Mrs. Bozanich suggested to you that it was inconsistent with the picture painted in court of Jose Menendez?
Yes.
Now, you have, do you not, Dr. Burgess, every single prosecution interview with every single potential witness?
Yes.
Has the prosecution generated any information from anybody that Jose Menendez ever cried?
No.
Now, you have suggested that there are potential interpretations for some of the phrases that were used by Erik and Lyle in this tape that would be supportive of the self-defense explanation that they gave at this trial.
Yes.
I just want to clarify something. Are you saying that it is your opinion that, in fact, that is what they are saying?
No.
Are you simply saying that's a potential interpretation?
Objection leading.
You're asking about the transcript here in the tape recording?
Yes, Your Honor.
Right, objection overruled.
Yes.
And you're not offering those interpretations, are you?
No, I'm not.
You're saying it should have been followed up?
That is correct.
Now, you have previously testified, have you not, about Erik Menendez saying something in this tape that was indicative of his desire to confess.
Yes.
And you previously testified about the clues he gave to the police when they interviewed him.
Yes.
And in analyzing this tape, does he appear to be giving clues to the truth without actually coming out and saying it?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained. Sustained.
Are there things that he is saying that are subject to interpretation that is consistent with the testimony he gave at trial?
Same objection and argumentative.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
And are there things that Lyle Menendez is saying that are subject to interpretation consistent with self-defense?
Objection. Same objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, let me go to things that Mrs. Bozanich asked you about. For example, on page 15, I think you've testified that Dr. Oziel changes the subject in the middle of a speech that begins on line 12 and to the topic of what part in the killing of the father had to do with what the father was doing to the sons versus what he's doing to the mother.
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez rejects the suggestion that the father was killed because of what he was doing to him.
Yes.
And do you see what follows that? It was not because of what he was doing to me. And Lyle goes on to explain he had decided and splintered off. He said he didn't want any more money. He was going to be independent. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do you recall Lyle's testimony that at the point when Erik revealed to him about the molestation, he felt he was separating from the family and things were going well and he was going his own way?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you remember Lyle's testimony?
Let's not have the witness's memory tested by what she did or did not remember of someone else's testimony. It's irrelevant.
Okay. Did you form the opinion that this statement by Lyle Menendez on page 15 was subject to an interpretation consistent with the self-defense information that was presented at the trial?
Yes.
Now, with respect to that, Mrs. Bozanich asked you questions about whether certain statements that appear to reflect thinking or decision-making or figuring things out was consistent or inconsistent with the fight or flight, the automatic limbic response.
Yes.
Okay. Are there situations that you have analyzed in your professional capacity where self-defense was in response to a sudden threat, unforeseen?
Yes.
And are there situations where you have analyzed people's behavior in the context where self-defense is something that was anticipated because the threat was of some duration?
Yes.
Now, in your analysis of this case, okay, from the standpoint of the limbic system,
Yes.
Was it your testimony that the limbic system clicks in at the moment when the threat appears imminent?
You're asking in general, not reference to this case and the
No, her
facts of this
testimony
case?
in this case.
Well, then we're going beyond the scope of the examination, so rephrase the question.
I don't believe so.
Well, I do, so rephrase the question.
No, I thought the scope included that aspect of her testimony.
Not if you go beyond the generalized description of the fear.
Right, but I'm talking, no,
In
you're right,
general,
I'm sorry,
you're
you're
going
right.
beyond that.
It is in general. In general, the fight-flight clicks in when the threat appears imminent.
Yes.
Okay, and that was how you testified here?
Yes.
However, you were asked whether certain of these statements were consistent or inconsistent with the notion of self-defense.
Yes.
And in this particular case, is the threat that resulted in the behavior in self-defense a sudden one or one of some duration?
Objection on the unscope.
Sustained.
Let's turn to page 27 then. Okay, I want to actually just refer you to a question that Mrs. Bozanich asked you about something that was on page 28. She focused, did she not? On page 28, line 19, Erik's statement with reference to his father. He was somebody that I loved and almost had no choice to do what I did, and I hate myself for doing it.
Yes.
And Mrs. Bozanich asked you several times what the significance of the word almost was.
Yes.
Now, you're aware, are you not, that there are 3 times prior to that statement, almost had no choice, where Erik says unequivocally, I had no choice.
Yes.
Objection argumentative, Your Honor.
Overruled.
You look on page 28 at line 4.
It's about time he overruled something, and this should be allowed in because if she's only taking bits and pieces of his testimony that are clearly inconsistent with something else that he says, then yeah, they need to be able to bring that back in and in her redirect.
Erik there says, I very much regret it. I may not have had a choice. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and look at page 27. You see line 27, this led up to the fact where I had no choice.
Yes, I see that.
And line 28, where I would have taken any other choice.
Yes, I see that.
So I ask you, are those statements consistent with the notion of acting from an instinct or survival state, as you've described, is the limbic system response?
Yes.
Well, there you go. I think that blows Ms. Bozanich's argument out of the water because she just gave 4 other examples that were clearly fear-based, fear responses.
Now, you were asked about this notion that Dr. Oziel laughs at his patients to break the tension. You recall that question?
Yes, I do.
Objection misstates the question.
Right, regardless of the specific characterization, recall the questioning on cross-examination.
I do.
Turning to page 38, lines 23. Actually, the laughing part is at 21, isn't that? This is Dr. Oziel laughing at 21.
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez tells him that he hates the hugging.
Yes.
This is his protest.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Oziel then says, you know what? I don't care.
Yes.
And you've already characterized what you thought of the therapist saying that.
Yes.
Do you see what Lyle Menendez says in response to that?
Yes, I do.
He says, I know you don't.
Yes.
Now, did you attach any significance to Lyle Menendez telling Dr. Oziel that he knows he doesn't care?
Yes, I did.
And what significance did you attach to
Objection
that?
irrelevant.
Sustained.
You have testified that you do not believe that the story that the Menendez brothers are telling Dr. Oziel here about mercy killing is true.
Objection, excuse me. Misstates the testimony and improper opinion.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
You were asked whether some of the statements that they're making about this mercy killing are consistent with self-defense. Do you recall those questions by Mrs. Bozanich?
Yes, I do.
All right. And you've testified that in order for a patient to tell a therapist the truth, one needs 2 things.
Yes.
What are the 2 things?
They need to feel safe. They need to be able to trust the person.
And when Lyle Menendez tells Dr. Oziel that he knows he doesn't care about him,
Yes.
is that the kind of statement that is consistent with trust or inconsistent with trust?
Objection calls for speculation on part of the witness.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
It's inconsistent.
And is that statement consistent with the notion that you acknowledge that the therapist is trying to help you, or inconsistent with that notion?
It's inconsistent.
Now, Mrs. Bozanich focused you on the phrase on page 29. Where on line 11, well, first of all, on line 10, Dr. Oziel is asking what is beyond control, and we've already addressed that. But on line 11, Erik Menendez says, eventually it had to happen. It was basically ruining my life.
Yes.
Should we call that?
Yes.
And you said you did not find that contradictory to...
You did not find that?
Contradictory to self-defense.
Yes.
And in not finding that contradictory to self-defense, is that because there's a potential interpretation here of eventually it had to happen?
Yes.
And what is the potential interpretation that you were ascribing to that in order to find it not contradictory to self-defense?
Overruled.
It had to do with the abuse.
Okay, and what eventually had to happen?
That it had to stop.
And is your opinion that this is not inconsistent with self-defense also based on a potential interpretation for the words, it was basically ruining my life?
Yes.
And what is the potential interpretation of that?
Objection, false or speculation.
Are you asking what could have been clarified, or
Yes,
in a
indeed.
questioning? All right.
Yes, you would have to clarify what he essentially meant by that regarding that statement.
But when you told Mrs. Bozanich that you did not find these statements by Erik Menendez to be inconsistent with self-defense, that's because you had in mind...
Counsel, why don't you ask her
that-
why she felt that way?
I did the question
No,
before.
you didn't.
Okay.
Why don't
Why
you
did
ask
you
her?
feel that way? Why did you feel that eventually it had to happen and it was basically ruining my life is not inconsistent with the self-defense explanation that's been posited here?
Because it's not clear, and because that if it didn't stop, he had to have it stopped. And it was the danger and the survival and all of that component.
Okay, so you're still talking about the sexual abuse.
Yes.
So you are ascribing to it was basically ruining my life. By it, are you saying potentially that could mean the sexual abuse?
Right. It's,
False or speculation.
Well, it's also leading objection sustained.
Do you understand what I'm asking, Dr. Burgess?
Well, there's no question at this point, so you'll have to ask a question.
I'm asking what potential interpretation you're giving to the word it on line 11 of page 29.
Are you giving any interpretation to it, or are you just saying it should be clarified? It should have been clarified.
it should have been clarified. I think that before we get into it would have to be clarified. That's what I had originally said.
But you told Mrs. Bozanich it was not inconsistent with self-defense.
Right.
Why not?
Objection, ask and answer.
All right, when you said not inconsistent with self-defense, what did you mean? Start with that.
Start with that. Well, the it refers to what happened in that particular. What he's referring to is what happened.
What do you mean by what happened?
Did you interpret the question regarding self-defense to be a generic response rather than specific to this case?
Yes, I was really
All right.
being generic.
All right.
Yes.
You have information, though, where you could be specific with respect to this case, could you not?
Yes.
Well, I'm asking you to be specific.
Pardon me, I think that's beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I don't believe it was beyond, it was limited in Mrs. Bozanich's exam.
Yes, it was. It was limited to the flight-to-fight response.
Okay. I would like to turn your attention to page 34. Mrs. Bozanich asked you a case-specific question about the information that Erik Menendez is giving on lines 4 and 5, where he says there was freedom in my lifetime, but my life would be structured and I would have freedom outside of the structure. Remember, she asked you if that was consistent or inconsistent with the notion that he'd be forced to be home 2 or 3 nights a week.
Yes, I remember that.
Okay? Now, I believe your answer was that it was not inconsistent.
Yes.
What significance, if any, I think she asked you, is there any indication in this statement of Erik's about this issue of having to be home 2 or 3 nights a week?
Yes.
What significance, in any, do you give to the words that Erik uses on line 6? It was signs of pain.
Yes.
What significance do you give to that?
Well, the significance is how painful it would be for him to have to be home.
So are you saying that he could be alluding to the fact that his father had basically told him he wasn't escaping to college after all?
That's right.
You don't know that he's doing that, but he could be.
That's correct.
Now, with respect to page 42, Mrs. Bozanich asked you if the reference to that Lyle makes about I just let him sleep on it for a couple of days, I'm in a very good position, et cetera, okay? If
Yes.
that was inconsistent with self-defense.
Yes.
And you said it was not.
Yes.
And were you thinking, without telling us what it is, but were you thinking of case-specific issues when you answered that question?
Yes, I was.
And did that have to do with information that was testified to about the sequence of events the last 3 days?
Overall, I think she's already said that in her testimony
Exactly.
in answer to the question asked before. So,
Yes.
Okay. And so in order to answer that question, you had to refer to specifics of the case?
That's correct.
Is there a specific incident that occurred over those last few days having to do with the mother and how she presented herself that, in your opinion, could be an interpretation of what this means?
sustained.
When you answered the question for Mrs. Bozanich, did you have a specific incident involving the mother in mind?
Overall, you can answer the question, or were you thinking in general about the self-defense as a general term rather than specific to this case?
No, not in that particular question.
What is no?
I had a specific.
What was the specific?
Specific related to the mother.
And what was the specific in relation to the mother?
Overall.
The specific I had in mind related to the information they learned about the mother knowing about the abuse and then not going to protect, and to siding with the father, and to now becoming a danger.
Was there a specific thing that you knew about that happened 2 days after the confrontation with the father that happened Saturday night that involved the mother that you had in mind?
Yes.
And do you recall what that was, what the mother said or did Saturday night?
Yes, this is where the mother did say to Erik Menendez that he was the cause for the family problem.
He was the cause. You're the reason this family won't work out?
Yes.
I could have a moment, and I'll see if I'm done in this phase. Yeah? Miss Lansing tells me I'm done, so I'll take my cue from her.
All right, any recross?
I believe I have one or two.
All right, go ahead.
Stacey,
Yes.
I believe you indicated that Dr. Ozier's testimony, he never indicated that the defendants had love for their parents. Is that correct? Remember being asked that on redirect by Ms. Abramson?
Yes.
Right. And are you aware of the fact that Dr. Oziel's testimony in this case was confined to the sessions of October the 31st and November the 2nd?
Yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right, how long will the examination take before the Erik Menendez jury only?
Well, can we approach for a moment?
Certainly. Jury room, and then we'll call you when we're ready for you. So hopefully by then everything will be coordinated. We'll be able to proceed with the next witness with both juries. So the blue jury come back here, gold jury go back to your jury room, and hopefully we'll be able to proceed as scheduled here. And the defendant Erik Menendez and his counsel. Further examination of the witness.
Yes, Your Honor.
So this is in front of Erik's jury only. I guess the blue jury is Erik's jury, sorry. Because Ms. Abramson is Erik's attorney. So since she's doing the direct here, then this is just for Erik's jury.
Now, Dr. Burgess, you conducted, as you previously testified in front of this jury, an evaluation of Erik Menendez from the standpoint of whether he has a psychological profile typical of sexually abused adolescent young adults.
Yes.
And you have rendered your opinion on that previously in this case.
Correct.
Now, in listening to this tape and in scrutinizing it as you've testified you did, was there information in this tape that was consistent or inconsistent with that psychological portrait or profile that you saw in Erik Menendez?
Yes. There's material on the tape that was consistent with this profile.
And can you tell us generally what that material was?
Yes, in general, there was a great deal of emotion shown by Erik Menendez. There was the statements of his love for his parents. It was quite clear on the tape. And there was also examples of his confusion, both his thinking and his feelings, around a number of issues.
Issues relating to his parents and the family?
Yes, to the family issues, the parents and the family issues.
And are those things typical of abused children?
Yes, they are.
Now, in analyzing the surface content of this tape, it does not on the surface appear that the brothers are telling Dr. Oziel a self-defense molestation scenario.
That is correct.
Okay. You had indicated that there are many cues and clues in this that should have been explored that are subject to potential interpretation.
That is correct.
Looking at the entire tape, both the process, the interaction between the people, what's actually said, what is followed up, what isn't followed up, is the information on this tape inconsistent with the self-defense explanation that was testified to by both of the Menendez brothers?
It is not inconsistent with the with that statement, no.
And why is it not inconsistent, even though it doesn't specifically say it's self-defense?
Right. Several reasons. First of all, this is not a tape that really is truth-seeking. As one, it has the clues that are present, as we've mentioned. And another factor is that the theory that is presented, or the reason that is presented, or the idea that is presented does not make sense.
That's the mercy killing of the mother and the killing of the father for putting the mother in that condition?
Yes, that the mother was miserable and that the father was responsible for making the mother miserable.
Okay. Now, you said that this theory does not make sense. Is there an aspect to this theory with respect to its chronology, if you will, that leads you to not believe it?
Yes.
Excuse me, Your Honor. Move to strike It's irrelevant, I believe.
Sustain the answer.
That leads you to conclude that it does not make psychological sense.
Yes.
And what is that?
The reason is that this material that is presented is based on what could be considered old history back in 1987. That's the material that's being used to describe some of the things. It is not current history. It's not 1989 history.
And when you talk about this old history, old news, this has to do with the mother's condition at some point in time.
Yes, there's a great deal of statements on these tapes that gets into the mother's, the suicide notes, et cetera, and that relates back to 1987.
And is there any information on this tape that relates to what's going on with the mother in 1989 as you understand that based on all the other information that you have in this case?
Objection, call for speculation and proper opinion.
Sustained.
You have information based on testimony in this case, witnesses who testified, records from the mother's therapy, all these things concerning what her situation is in 1989. Is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And is any of that alluded to in this tape?
Objection, call for speculation.
Sustained.
What are the issues as you understand them concerning the mother in 1989?
What issues are we talking about?
The issues concerning what her condition is as compared to what it was in 1987.
Your emotional condition is what you're asking?
Her emotional condition and her interaction with the members of the family. That's what's being talked
All
about.
right, why don't you rephrase the question then?
Okay. With respect to the interactions in the family and the mother's way of presenting herself, or the way she is presented in 1989, do you have information about that?
Yes.
Okay. And are some of that information significant to your belief that this was a homicide in self-defense?
Yes.
And what is that information that you have?
Objection, calls for hearsay, Your Honor. And it's also argumentative and not the proper subject of expert testimony.
Sustained.
Well, you've indicated that the theory that's presented doesn't make sense. Is that because of this other information that you have?
Yes, it is.
Would you tell us then what this other information is?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, may we approach?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to re-ask the question this way. Now, in your view, in your opinion, when you formulated your opinion concerning self-defense as the reason for these homicides, did you consider information about the mother, her condition in 1989, how she was relating to her sons, how she was interacting with her husband in support of that opinion?
Yes.
And is your conclusion about the information on this tape that it is does not make sense to you, based in part on the fact that it does not include that information that you considered?
Yes.
Now, did you find that the information, just on the face value, that there is information in this tape recording that supports the claims, if you will, of other forms of abuse that were made in this case by the Menendez brothers and by other witnesses?
Yes.
And with respect, just to focus on a couple, with respect to the notion that the Menendez brothers and Erik in particular were isolated in the sense that they could not communicate with the parents, that Erik, for example, could not go to his mother and tell her about problems with the father. Is that supported in this tape?
Yes, it is supported.
Is the notion that in this family the children could not discuss with the parents real issues and real problems in the abusive situation supported in this tape?
Yes, it is.
And even on the face of this tape, is there information from Erik Menendez and also from Lyle Menendez that the mother was not someone he could have gone to complain about the father?
Yes.
Now, is there information on this tape from listening to it, just hearing how Erik talks, plus the specific things he says, that corroborate your conclusions and opinions about Erik, his emotionality and his psychological personality, if you will?
Yes, there is.
And without going through all of it, is there a specific area that in this tape that corroborates that?
Yes.
And can you focus on that particular section? I'll try to find it, reading your mind. Turning to page 28.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a segment there starting at line 19 that you found particularly significant with respect to
Yes.
your evaluation of Erik? And would you tell us what that is, and would you explain why it's significant to you?
Yes. His statement on line 20 that he says, and I hate myself for doing that. What that indicates is not only his self-hatred at that particular time, but it goes into, if you see earlier, the no choice to do it. And even though he did it, he hates himself. And he further has said, can I go into that?
Yes.
Okay. He has further said that if there was anything he could undo about that, he would rather be dead than what happened.
Okay.
That's how much he hates himself for what he did.
And he is saying this on this tape, but are you indicating that in your 50 or so hours with him, that this is a theme that has been repeated?
A theme repeated very much over and over, yes.
And in your evaluation of Erik in the 50 hours that you've spent with him, did you form the opinion that he, first of all, blames himself even for some of the abuse that happened to him?
Objection and proper opinion.
Did you find that he has guilt about what happened here?
Objection and proper opinion.
Why don't you rephrase it to express himself?
All right. Well, first of all, in analyzing the tape, I think you've already said that you hear emotionality and remorse and guilt and regret and self-hatred.
Yes, I have.
And is that consistent with things that you have heard over the course of your evaluation time spent with Erik?
Yes, I have heard that.
And with respect to the references in this tape that he makes about being suicidal, is that consistent with things that you have heard in your evaluation of him?
Yes, it is consistent.
And is the way that he presents himself in this tape and the way that he talks about himself consistent with the psychological portrait of him that you have Well, with your opinion of him psychologically.
Yes, it is.
In what way is it consistent?
It is consistent with his profile that as a sexually abused young man, and the emotional state that he's in, the feelings that he has, as well as the confusion back and forth about the parents. All of that speaks to both the consistency with what is seen in abused young people, as well as with Erik Menendez.
I have nothing further.
So, Dr. Burgess, would it be correct to say then that there are things in this tape which support the defense theory of the case, correct?
Yes.
And that would also be supportive of the notion that this tape was created to help the defendants if they ever got caught, right? I believe you indicated you talked to Erik Menendez about the creation of this tape at some point, and you related that conversation the last time I cross-examined you this morning. Do you remember when it was that you talked to Erik Menendez about the tape?
It was a week or so ago. I don't have a precise date.
All right, but just within the last week, is that correct?
Yes, roughly.
And at no time before that?
No, not specifically.
Now, I'm going to just go over a couple of things within the transcript. On page 1 of the transcript, there is a colloquy here, actually it's more like a monologue by Erik Menendez talking about the Kennedys, and you indicated that what you found significant about his reference to the Kennedy brothers is that they both died.
I'm going to object this beyond that.
It is, unless you're going to tie it into the examination that relates only to this jury.
Well, Your Honor, I thought it was more prudent to save this for the examination in front of this jury, and that's why I did it.
All right.
And excuse me, this particular thing was not said in front of the Lyle Menendez jury.
Do you have a question that's going to follow up on this, you mean?
Yes, I just want to ask her about this particular thing that was only testified to in front of this jury. I can explain it if you want to
Go ahead,
approach.
just go ahead. Never mind, let's just do it. Go ahead, ask your question.
Okay. Now, I believe when you testified in front of this jury yesterday, the first time on direct, that you indicated what you found significant about this particular passage is that both of the Kennedy brothers mentioned here had died.
I believe I said that this was a metaphor. I was giving an example of how when you're looking and trying to analyze a tape, you look for things that may be a theme, and this was one example of it. You could not make that assumption until you obtain that information from the patient. That's something that the therapist keeps in mind.
Okay, but what is it a metaphor for?
Well, you would elicit that from the patient.
But
you have your own ideas of what it might be, but you have to keep eliciting that. One possibility, I said, is the fact that both of these men were killed.
All right, is another possibility the fact that both of these men were controlled by their father?
No, I didn't. No, I would just go with what the fact is, what the overt fact is,
Okay,
on a metaphor.
Okay, so when Erik Menendez says at line 7, we thought that no matter what we did in our life, my father would be there, and that it would be mine's been amended. It was related to Kennedy. When Kennedy was president, his father told him that he wanted Bobby in this position, and it did not matter what John said.
Yes.
So are you saying that you're rejecting the notion that he's talking about a father's control?
No, I'm not rejecting. I'm just saying I thought the original question was how that opening is an example of a metaphor. You would interpret that. You can also interpret that by just looking at the manifest statement.
In other words, just look at what it says.
Correct.
Okay, so when you say look at the manifest statement, you're just saying look at what it says.
Just what it says, yes.
Okay, and what it seems to say is that he's talking about an analogy between the Kennedy father controlling his two sons and Mr. Menendez controlling his two sons.
Well, no, it also could be missing the parents. I mean, that's an equally plausible interpretation.
That he misses his parents the same way John and Bobby miss their parents?
No, he's talking about my father would be there.
Oh.
He's making a personal reference to his father. Then he comes in with the analogy to another family.
Now, page 30 of the transcript. When Erik Menendez is speaking about his relationship with his mother, and he indicates that he had things that he wanted to talk to her about. I don't know if I was able to complete this line of questioning this morning, but let me just ask this. Did you have any specific discussion with Erik Menendez about this particular passage contained between lines 3 and line 11? Did you ask him?
No, I did not ask any particular line by line. I did not ask him of that.
Did you ask him anything in terms of what kinds of things did he wish he could have discussed with his mother?
Not in particular, no.
Did you ask him in general?
I'm going to object to this vague. With respect to just this transcript or over the course of just the hour as well?
All right. Well, did you, in relationship to this particular topic, did you ever ask Erik Menendez if he could talk to his mother about relationships with different people and everything?
What was talked about had to do with, this is a wish, by the way, and this would fall into that category. He did not tell his mother a lot, as is stated there, and it was not in specific that he said what he would want to have been able to tell her, because he knew he couldn't talk to her. So it really stayed at the wish level.
At page 33, starting at line 14, Erik Menendez is talking about college.
Yes.
And he talks about the fact of wanting to major in theater but not being able to because of his father. Did you ever talk to him about the fact that his father was influential, to not use the word control, but influential in his choice of courses, for instance, for college?
Yes.
And so this particular segment of page 33 is accurate insofar as you know.
Yes, this is precisely one of the things that he talked about, where father almost tells him what he's supposed to take.
All right. Now, I believe you indicated that it was your opinion that Erik Menendez was sexually abused and that there are things in this tape and also contained in the transcript which support your theory. And I think the three things you mentioned were his emotion, which would be more the tape because of the sound, his love for his parents, and his confusion. Were those the three things?
Those were three things.
All right. Now, the fact that he has emotion over killing his parents, you think indicates that he was sexually abused. Is that correct?
It indicates a state that presented a demeanor, a emotional state. It doesn't have a direct correlation. You cannot tie that specifically, but it's an emotional state. And it really is getting at the emotions he had for his parents, his ambivalence, his confusion about these parents and trying to reconcile what the parents did.
But emotion is not a symptom of sexual abuse.
No, it's not a symptom per se. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not a symptom per se, but it speaks to a condition that is evoked over time from the abuse, from long periods of chronic abuse. You get mood swings, you get mood state, you get that type of response.
And do some people who kill other people feel emotion afterwards, even if they haven't been sexually abused by the person they killed?
Objection, Your Honor, that calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Yes, you can certainly have other emotional states in other situations.
Are you able to distinguish what particular emotional state is being expressed in this tape?
No, I'm not. That's what I'm saying. I'm not picking out the exact emotion. I'm just saying that an emotional state, mood swings, are part of a pattern that can be seen in chronically victimized persons.
Now, I believe you related, though, at least the question as posed to you by Ms. Abramson was that this particular emotion was an indicator of sexual abuse. You weren't asked about generic abuse, but you were asked specifically about sexual abuse. All right, and so it's still your testimony then that this emotion is an indicator of a particular kind of abuse that is sexual abuse.
It's a generalized state. It is not trauma specific, but it is a generalized state. And we tend to divide symptoms into these two areas, what are trauma specific and what are more generalized. This would fall into a more generalized pattern.
Okay. Is love for your parents trauma specific?
No.
And is confusion trauma specific?
No, those are more generalized states.
So would it be fair to say that the emotion that he has expressed, the love for his parents and the confusion, are just as likely to have occurred simply because of a killing, not because of sexual abuse?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm saying the state, the profile of a person that's been sexually abused or abused over a long period of time.
Now, I believe that the testimony of Dr. Briere was that there's no specific symptomology that points only to sexual abuse.
I object to that, Your Honor. Testimony of Dr. Briere.
Sustained.
All right. Would it be your testimony that there are no specific symptomologies which point only to sexual abuse?
In terms of the generalized pattern, yes, that it's generalized to a number of trauma type situations.
And so love for your parents is something that is not specific to sexual abuse, correct? In other words, your parents could be abusive, but not sexually abusive, and you could still love them.
That's correct. That's a more generalized state.
And then confusion as well.
So if it doesn't cross that line to physically intimate, then it's okay? Is that what she's trying to say? I don't really get her questioning.
Confusion might also result just from the mere fact of having killed your parents.
This is a pattern. I'm talking about specifically a pattern that you see.
What's a pattern?
A pattern, the confusion, because you see him talking about different aspects, loving his parents, giving a situation, then saying, contradicting that. He's really trying to put together what has happened over time and his feeling state back at a point in time, then after the killings.
Okay, well, what are the things that you see in this tape that are specific to sexual abuse?
Well, one has to do with the act that occurred. I mean, that's one possible statement, but it's a generalized pattern. I think what is important to say is a generalized pattern.
A generalized pattern of what?
Of the mood swings, the mood state, the emotional state, the confusion, the ambivalence over the love of parents.
Do you think committing a murder could cause a person to have mood swings afterwards?
Committing a killing.
I'm going to object to that as calling for speculation.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, do you think that committing a murder might cause the person to have mood swings
I'm
afterwards?
also going to object to the use of the word murder. That's an issue for the jury to decide.
Could it create it certainly can create a post-traumatic stress response where the event keeps coming into one's mind over and over and over when it's an emotional state, when it's committed in an emotional state.
My question was, could killing someone, could murdering someone cause you to have mood swings, yes or no?
I don't know. I haven't seen enough on that particular symptom.
Okay, could killing someone that you knew very well, like a parent or a spouse, would it be inconsistent to see that person, the killer, express love for the person killed?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. It's calling for an improper opinion with no foundation.
Well, killing self-defense is certainly going to create a lot of confusion.
No, but that wasn't my question, Dr. Burgess.
Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, if you kill someone that you love, would that preclude you later on from expressing love for the person you killed? Yes or no?
It may or may not.
Right. So the answer is it could and it couldn't.
Right, depends on circumstances.
And if you kill someone or murder someone, do you think that would cause you perhaps to have some emotion afterwards?
It could.
Objection, Your Honor. That calls for speculation.
Yeah, first raise the question.
Okay, well, Dr. Burgess, you've indicated, you were asked specifically by Ms. Abramson, if there are things in the tape that show that he was a sexually abused young adult, and you said...
Objection, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. I asked
All right, that's not right. Objection sustained.
Are emotion, love for parents, and confusion indicators of sexual abuse?
Those are indicators of an emotional state, a state of mind that can be traced to chronic abuse over time, chronic sexual abuse. Those are general indicators that are reported, certainly in the literature, as well as seen in this particular situation.
Could those three indicators also be indicators of having participated in a murder?
Anything.
I think that calls for speculation.
Anything's possible. But I'm not saying, I will repeat, that I think that it's very important to see that this is a state of mind that has occurred over a length of time. It's chronic, and the confusion that is seen and what he describes in this tape is what I see.
All right, so you think that the emotion, the love for the parents, and the confusion stem from sexual abuse and not from the fact of having participated in the killing of his parents. Would that be fair to say?
I think it'd be fair to say that all of that is very compound. You can't separate out specifically what belongs where, that it all is something that has occurred in this particular situation.
But you were asked for indicators of sexual abuse within the tape, and you specifically...
Objection, that misstates the question.
All right, you're arguing with witness.
Dr. Burgess, so is it your testimony now that these things could be consistent with having participated in the killing as well?
Objection, argument.
Overruled.
I think I'm saying that you cannot separate out specifically a state of mind, if you will, looking at just this tape. This is what we're looking at, we're trying to analyze. We've already said that what's important here is that they have, there is missed clues, there is metaphors being used, there's a highly emotional state. The emotions that are seen on this tape are certainly come through as very, very important and very real.
And I believe it was your testimony that the emotion is an indicator of sexual abuse, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, that is not her testimony, and it's been asked and answered.
All right, objection sustained to the form of the question.
Dr. Burgess, in evaluating the defendant's emotion, his love for parents, and the confusion he expressed, did you consider the fact that he had participated in the killings of his parents?
Asked and answered.
Overruled.
Yes?
And did you reject that as a source for the confusion, the love for the parents, and the emotion?
I'm going to object the question as irrational.
Overruled.
I would say that it's very difficult to separate out what you're asking in this particular situation, that the moods, what has been described in terms of the mental state, in terms of the emotion, what was heard on the tape, and all of that, the ambivalence over the parents, that is all consistent with what is reported in the literature on abused, victimized young people.
I believe one of the things you found significant about this particular tape, and one of the things that you have mentioned in your testimony, is that it contains old information. Is that correct?
Yes, 1987 information.
I believe that you testified earlier that one of the things that you considered were the notes of Dr. Summerfield, correct?
Yes.
All right, my approach, please.
With what? All right, let's proceed.
I have nothing further.
All right, Denny, redirect. All right, you may step down. You're excused.
All right, that is the end of our defense expert witnesses, and the end of the Oziel confession tape, part 3. So we will continue on next week, Tuesday. We will begin with direct testimony of Lyle Menendez. We will go in order: Lyle, then Erik, and then we will do closing arguments. So this is what we've all kind of been waiting for, is to see what the boys have to say, their side of the story. And based on what we know so far, with all these experts have built us up to understand and realize what kind of volatile situation the boys were in, and to understand the trauma that they suffered in that house and how that trauma affected their mindset and the fear level that they had the week leading up to the homicides. So we will get to that and more. So please make sure you are subscribed. Hit that notification button, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate you guys. Have a good one. Bye now.